Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. For those of you who I don't know, I'm Alyssa Vine. I'm the University Director of Credit for Prior Learning in CUNY's Central Office of Academic Affairs. This is our second offering of this session focused on non-credit to credit evaluation and crosswalking. And for just as an upfront disclaimer, if you participated in this session back in December, it's going to be very similar, pretty much the same content, although we do have a few new things that will be introduced. Um, I think that we want to make sure that we are getting this content to as many people as possible, and that's one of the reasons why we're recording, and we'll be sharing the session with everyone who registered. This is part of our professional development offering. I will refer to a number of different sessions throughout today's workshop, referring to other trainings that we've done throughout the year, all of which are recorded and available on our CPL website. So that's all just to say that if you hear about something and you're like, I want to know more about that, we do have resources available. So, and with that, I am very pleased to introduce our facilitator for today's session, Bill McKenney. And Bill, I'll let you give fuller context on who you are and why you're with us today, and just my thanks to you for all the work that you've done to prepare for today's session. And I'm really excited for us to bring this information to our community.
Well, Alyssa, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be working with you and all of your colleagues at CUNY. Just absolutely delighted to have all of you here today on a Friday. I know there's never a non-busy time for all of us in higher education. My name is Bill McKinney, and as you can see here in the introductory slide, my title is a bit of a mouthful. I'm a senior partner for academic leadership and transformation at the Center for Academic Innovation. I have a relatively long career now, I think I can say, in higher education. I began my career as a faculty member. I began my career actually as a philosophy professor, but I have an odd background as a philosopher. I also have a degree in chemical engineering, so I did spend some time in industry, and so that kind of began my interest and desire to work in building those bridges between higher education and employers, which is a large part of what we're going to be talking about today. After my time as a faculty member and department chair, I spent 7 years as a dean. I was 4 years as a provost, 3 years as a president. Worked 8 years in the Indiana University System Office. Spent 2 years working for the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning. That's CAIL. Of course, they're very deeply involved in credit for prior learning, and of course building those bridges between employers and educators, which is a large part, again, of what we'll be talking about here today. A little bit about my current employer, and that's the Center for Academic Innovation. We are relatively new. In fact, there's a number of us from CAIL who are now with CAI. We're a little bit unique in the sense that not only are we a nonprofit organization, but in addition to the work that we do in helping institutions of higher learning build their adult learner strategy, work in credit for prior learning, which is, of course, why we're here today, working in those employer higher ed partnerships. We have a real focus on military connected learners, but we also believe very strongly in giving back to the institutions with whom we're fortunate enough to work. And we are working with those institutions to take a portion of the proceeds that we bring in, a portion of our contracts, to return back in the form of scholarships for students. And if you look on our website, if you look at our LinkedIn page, you will find stories that highlight the lives of adult learners. And so that's really what we're committed to. And that's really a big part of why I do what I do and why we're here today. So speaking of why we're here today, first of all, we've got 4 hours ahead of us. If at any point, we're all grown-ups here. You need to take a break, take a break. As Alyssa said, we're going to be recording this. You'll all get the recording. You all get the recording, and you also all get the slide deck. So that's not to say just run away right now, because I think the conversation is going to be every bit as valuable. But like I said, you need to get up, stretch your legs, get something to drink. By all means, feel free to do so. We will be taking some structured breaks and also a lunch break at about halfway through. So there's that coming up. But what we're all about here today, we're going to talk, and we'll be kind of going back and forth on occasion between me and Alyssa to talk about CPL at CUNY. Of course, we'll be talking about why CPL matters. The big part, of course, about why we're here today is talking about evaluating non-credit credentials for college credit. Why bother doing that in the first place? We'll talk a little bit about the benefits for students, the benefits for institutions, the benefits really even for communities. There's really a couple ways of going about doing that. There are external evaluations, and then there are also internal evaluations when you actually do this work on your own. And there are nuances to all of that, and we'll go through quite a bit of that. I want you all to feel free at any point, ask a question. I am absolutely not offended. We'll have, again, structured points where I'll say, okay, are there any questions? But if you've got one that you really want to get out there, odds are there's someone else in the group who's thinking the same thing. So get the question out there and we'll do our best to address it. If I don't have an answer off the top of my head, I'll make sure that I get it to Alyssa and she can get it out to the whole group. One thing that I will emphasize throughout this session, CPL, credit for prior learning, must be a process that identifies college level learning. There is a difference between the experiences that we all have in our lives and what subset of those experiences counts as college level learning. You and your faculty colleagues are always and properly should be the arbiters of academic quality. You determine what counts as college credit. You do that in your residential classes. Assigning credit for prior learning should be no different. So again, we'll talk about internal evaluations. There'll be some hands-on exercises where we turn things over to actually one of your faculty colleagues here within the CUNY system. We'll have ample time for Q&A and time to talk about next steps. So Alyssa, do you want to talk through some of these examples that we've got here, and then we'll dive right in?
Sure. Thanks, Bill. So when you filled out the registration form, there was a spot to let us know if there were particular areas, particular credentials that you're really interested in understanding how to evaluate. And this list is actually a carryover from when we ran the session in December. So we got so some of these were brought up. Actually, there was a lot of repetition. People mentioned the same things, but I just thought it was interesting, the variety and sort of the span of different disciplines and industries that people are interested in learning about. And I think it really speaks to the fact that learning strategies for evaluating learning, especially organized learning experiences like industry credentials, is something that is relevant across the board. I'm sure I'd actually really love to ask everybody here, when you have a chance, just introduce yourself in the chat with your name, your title, your college, and your discipline. If you, I think we do have quite a lot of faculty with us today. So, just would love, I think it's just interesting to think about it in that context of having, you can think about it in the sphere in which you operate, but this is also just, it goes across, and we can learn from each other in a lot of different ways, thinking about it that way. So just wanted to share this list, and you'll see we are plucking some of these out here and there to talk about throughout today's session.
Thanks, Alyssa. Yeah, we're really going to do our level best to make sure that this is as relevant to you and your students as possible. So, in that spirit, we've obviously got a set of learning outcomes that we hope you take with you either today or as you continue this work. I know full well that it is often the case that when you're doing this kind of work, when you're in this kind of session, this can be a lot of material. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time for that to percolate. So, absolutely nothing wrong with that. Um, so, what we hope not only by the time we're done here this afternoon, but as you continue to do this work. A couple of things that we hope that you're able to do. Okay. Um, Explain the institutional and equity impact of credit for prior learning. Identify some immediate opportunities for the awarding of credit based on an existing credential. Um, Use the ACE and NCCRS websites. We're going to walk through that. We're actually going to have you do some hands-on work in both of those websites. Those are two very, very easily accessible ways of identifying industry credentials that can translate into for-credit opportunities for your students. Those evaluations are done by faculty who do the work for both ACE and NCCRS. We'll explain what that's all about later. We hope that you'll be able to take a hard look at that documentation of prior learning and be able to do that, of course, efficiently. Apply consistent faculty-driven evaluation because really at the end of the day, that's what this is all about, is that the faculty subject matter expert is central in all credit for prior learning activity, not just the kinds of non-credit to credit crosswalks that we'll be talking about today, but all credit for prior learning. And I'll make reference to some of the other CPL techniques as we work our way through. So I love this work that I do. One of the other things that I love, however, is that I am a very, very avid Peloton bike rider. I don't know if anybody else rides a Peloton bike as a way of doing exercise, but one of my very favorite Peloton instructors is very fond of saying this: I make suggestions, you make decisions. He says that at the beginning of almost every class that he teaches. I take that to heart as a consultant. I am here to make suggestions based on my experience, based on everything that I have learned over the years, not just in credit for prior learning, but as a faculty member, as a senior academic leader, and certainly someone who has worked in building bridges between higher ed and employers. But at the end of the day, you know the realities on your campus. And this is one of the reasons why I am so grateful that Alyssa is here with us, because there are CUNY aspects to this work that will put a context in all of this kind of work that we're doing. So at the end of the day, everything that I'm saying is a suggestion. It's a suggestion based on experience, but you make the decisions because you're the experts. So before we dive into the real details here, I'd just love to get some level setting, and you can put this in the chat just so we can get a sense of where everyone is. So on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is, oh, I really don't have a whole lot of familiarity, and 5 is, you know what, Bill, I could probably be teaching this class. Okay. On a scale of 1 to 5, right? How familiar are you with credit for prior learning in general? So take a moment and just put it into the chat. Good. Getting kind of a range. By the way, for context, I do not consider myself a 5. There is always something to be learned in this work, and I expect to be learning from you today. So, All right, we're seeing some twos, some threes, some 2.5s. I saw a 4 earlier. We got a 3. This is a good range, and it is actually not at all surprising. Um, I think you'll find this in any group of academic professionals. And keep in mind, I would venture to say none of us were trained in this work. None of us. We engage in credit for prior learning in addition to the work that we're already doing. So this is something that is not only an add-on, but this is something that we are learning as we go. And the industry changes over time. I mean, think about the changes that are going on in higher ed right now in general. So I hope that by the end of the day today, those numbers bump up a little bit. But thank you for putting that in. Now, if you would please, on that scale of 1 to 5, how would you evaluate or how would you place yourself in terms of familiarity with evaluating non-credit credentials for credit? So a very specific kind of CPL. Feel free to throw that number into the chat as well. Again, kind of seeing that range. Okay, maybe it seems like it might be a little lower here. I'll tell you something that is very, very interesting that I have noticed over the last 3 years. There was a point, probably about a year and a half ago, where the most sought after, you know what I really want to learn about when it comes to credit for prior learning, and that was portfolio assessment. Everybody wanted to do portfolios. That was the flavor of the month. That has changed dramatically. Crosswalks, the kind of thing we're talking about today, really seems to be the thing that everyone is interested in. And there's good reason for that. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So, why does this work matter? Okay. Why does CPL matter? So we're going to walk through, in order to answer that question, talk a little bit about what credit for prior learning is. What is CPL? CPL will talk about some of the benefits for students. We'll talk about some of the benefits for institutions, your individual institutions, and of course, the CUNY system as a whole. And I also want to take a moment to talk about benefits for the community, because I think that's something that gets left out on occasion, unfortunately. In fact. All right. What is credit for prior learning? It is first and foremost credit for college level learning. What I like to think this does is it expands the umbrella of what you normally think of as student learning that counts for college credit. If you think about it, we've been engaged in one way, shape, or form of credit for prior learning for a very long time. Not all college credits earned by your students are credits earned at your institution. There are transfer credits. In a sense, when a student transfers in credit from another institution, that's prior learning, right? You may have an articulation agreement or whatever the case may be. That is credit for learning that happened prior to those students being at your institution, or they took summer classes at another institution. You know, you get the idea. Advanced placement credits. That's prior learning, if you think about it, right? That's for students. They're in high school, they took an AP course, they take the course, they get the requisite score that counts for credit at your institution. Boom, it comes in. That's prior learning. So, in a sense, CPL is not something new. What is new is the kind of learning that counts. And that's really what we're going to be talking about in the time that we spend here today. This could be learning that takes place on the job. This could be learning that took place in a high school apprenticeship. This could be learning that takes place for the returning adult learner who spent 5 years, 10 years on the job, an accountant, a payroll manager, an HR professional, any number of things. They then come to your institution and say, look, I've got all this experience. Why should I have to take course X, Y, and Z? What we'll be focused on most today is those industry credentials that a learner may have accumulated over time. So that's really, and how you translate that, or in some cases, why you might not want to translate that into college level credit. Because at the end of the day, it's those certified credits that the faculty maintain. This is college level learning, and your registrar certifies. That's what students take with them on their transcript, and that's what keeps the mark of academic quality at your institution. So it is based on rigorous assessment by faculty subject matter experts. And I can't say enough, credit for prior learning is opportunity. And I have taken this with me for almost a year now. I had the pleasure back when I was working for CAI to do an on-ground workshop for CUNY at LaGuardia Community College. We had an in-person convening. And one of your faculty colleagues in a breakout session said, when we were talking about, we were actually talking about portfolio evaluation. And she said, this is noble work that we do. And I have carried that with me because she is absolutely right. This is an opportunity for students, for your learners to get a leg up on their credential. And that's what leads us to talking about the CPL benefits for students. First and foremost, that's what this is all about. There are numerous studies, and I will be putting actually an annotated bibliography in the chat when we get a chance to take a short break here, probably close to the top of the hour. That goes into a lot more detail of how some of these facts and figures that I'm going to mention here came about from a number of national organizations that have done some really good detailed analysis of the benefits of CPL. But learners who come to your institution and are awarded credit for prior learning, by and large, these students throughout their time at your institution tend to have higher GPAs. Along with that, they have a shorter time to getting their degree. On average, students who come in with credit for prior learning complete their credential on average, and this is a national average of both 2- and 4-year institutions, 14 months faster. For the returning adult learner, and I can't emphasize this enough, time and money are critical. Absolutely critical. When I was a college president, the system chancellor, I was a college president in the University System of Georgia. And at the time, our chancellor always stressed and always reminded us that far too many of our students were a flat tire away from not being able to re-enroll for the next semester. And I can guarantee you that you all know students who have been in that unfortunate situation. By compressing that time to degree, you decrease the chance of having that kind of incident delay or even stop progress toward degree. Students who come in with credit for prior learning, by and large, have um, better retention rates. As a consequence, they have better completion rates. On average, 17 to 36% higher completion rates than students who do not come in with credit for prior learning. This last point, I really can't emphasize enough. There is a psychological and equity benefit to credit for prior learning. First of all, the equity benefit. It opens the door to access and to credential completion for far more students. It increases gender equity, racial equity, socioeconomic equity. I can't stress that enough. And some of the sources that I put in when I put that annotated bib into the chat for you. And by the way, it's also referenced at the end of this slide deck, so you'll have ample opportunity to grab and take a deeper dive, if you wish, into some of those resources. There's also, though, there's a psychological benefit here. Okay, there is a real psychological benefit because students feel validated. They feel heard. They feel as if the work that they have done, that they have put themselves into for years in many cases, is being recognized. And not just, hey, nice job, job well done. I mean, there's some value to that. Don't get me wrong. But to reward some of that with college credit is huge. This also is something that when that starts to happen, it benefits the institution. And you'll notice, if you're thinking, did you just copy and paste the list of benefits for students into the list of benefits for institutions? Why, yes, I did. And there's a reason why. If you think about it, this makes sense. What benefits your students really should benefit the institution. And remember, you're not giving credit away. It's college level learning. Higher GPAs benefit the institution. And my goodness, shorter time to degree, better retention rates, better completion rates. That absolutely benefits students. But let me point out this next bullet point. Students who earn credit for prior learning, and this also punctures a long-standing myth about credit for prior learning. Students who earn credit for prior learning actually enroll for more residential credits on average than students who do not earn credit for prior learning. Why? You retain them at higher rates. If you retain them at higher rates, they're going to enroll for more credits. It just stands to reason. So one of the long-standing criticisms of credit for prior learning is that it is going to take away from our institutional credits. Well, to a certain extent, you're not wrong. If a student comes in and they earn credit for prior learning for a couple of introductory courses, or maybe even a sophomore level course, yes, they're getting credit for that. But just as they would earn credit by transferring that in from another institution, so sure, they won't be enrolling for those courses. But what will they be enrolling for? More advanced courses. Why? Because you're retaining them. The fact of the matter is that you get more residential credits registered. That's more tuition revenue. At the end of the day, this is a retention tool that not only benefits students, but it benefits the institution. Finally, there are profound benefits for communities. Institutions who award credit for prior learning particularly for industry credentials, the subject of our time together today, but also for any number of other experiences, whether it be through portfolio evaluation or credit by exam or whatever the case may be. You have improved employer educator relationships because this kind of work requires staying in touch with those employers. And I'll talk a bit more about that in some detail later, but just to give you a little sneak peek, when you're evaluating industry credentials, you need to have a good line of communication open with those employers because the employer is granting this credential, this certification. As a faculty member, you want to really be able to talk with them and make sure that those learning outcomes translate into a course syllabus. That's really why we call it a crosswalk. And keeping those lines of communication open is critical because industry changes no matter what line of work. Healthcare changes, tech changes. Oh my gosh, tech is changing by the day. And as professionals in your disciplines, you're staying on top of that. So having that enhanced employer educator ecosystem is absolutely critical. And of course, what it does is it gets the word out. It's like, look, this school really gets it. This school is great for you to go back and complete your degree. I worked for a president when I was with IU many years ago now, who used to always talk about the virtuous cycle. That if you have students who have a good experience, that word gets out and they become your loyal alumni. They spread the word. It's a win all around. It enhances the workforce pipeline in your communities, and really in many ways it can have that kind of impact statewide. And of course, in some cases and in some regions, particularly regions like where I live, where you are seeing really a demographic drop off, it can help to decrease in some instances brain drain, which at the end of the day is pretty critical. So here's a summary of what we find to be the value proposition of credit for prior learning. Students save time, and as a consequence, they save money. They feel validated as not only learners, but professionals as well. Okay. More adult students graduate. And at the end of the day, that's what you want to see, right? You want to see them at commencement. I always said, no matter what role I was in, if I was president, a provost, if I was a dean, certainly when I was a president, what I used to say is, I want to shake your hand on commencement, right? We want you to succeed. You have to do the work, but we want you to succeed. We want you to graduate. Along the way, they persist, they take more credits, and finally, okay, talk about this for a moment. Institutions can use credit for prior learning as a market differentiator. Students shop around. And because of that, when they've got industry experience, when they've got work experience, institutions, credit for prior learning is not new. A lot of places, okay? That's why you're all here, right? CUNY is very invested in this work. CUNY uses this as a market differentiator. You as individual institutions can and shouldn't be shy about using credit for prior learning as a market differentiator. So I mentioned places, organizations where you can get more information. Certainly, in addition to us at CAI, there are a number of national organizations, and we've listed some of them here for you to take a look at, that have a wide variety of some deeper sources where you can dig in and gather information on credit for prior learning. So before I turn things back over to our friends at CUNY to walk through some of the CUNY work and policies on CPL, let's just pause for a moment. Are there any questions?
Bill, one thing that I will add when we're thinking about market differentiation
Oh,
and
yeah.
value to the institution, I just think it's important to recognize, like in this group, that we are definitely seeing that there are expectations and a lot of emphasis placed on credit for prior learning both from New York City and New York State. And I think that we're seeing that through the CUNY Reconnect work and through what was known as NISOP, and I am hearing is now New York State Reconnect. But these
Okay.
are initiatives that are really pointing toward creating pathways into CUNY and SUNY institutions for adult learners, for the people who are in the workforce, especially in particular sectors that the state has identified and that are quite consistent, really, with where we know there are a lot of these industry credentials and a lot of opportunity for us to think about that alignment. So I think just I everything that you're saying about the value to students, value to institutions, value to community, I think at CUNY we definitely can think about that in the context of what we are hearing from our city and state leadership about this work as well.
Thank you. Thank you. That's yeah, you really can't understate that. I mean, it's New York is a leader, is an absolute leader in this work. So thank you. Thank you, Alyssa. Other questions, comments? Okay. Well, again, like I said, never hesitate. If you've got questions, you've got comments, please just jump in at any point and we will be happy to dive into that in a little bit more detail.
I'm
So, as I
sorry.
promised,
I'm sorry. I do have a question, Alyssa.
please, please.
This question is for Alyssa. Where can we, or you, Bill, where can we find those that list of sectors that the state has identified
Oh,
as areas
sure.
they want to focus on CPL?
Sure. I will when I hand it back over to Bill in a little bit, I will find the information to share with you. I can tell you though that the sectors include it's health related disciplines, it's technology, um, it's teacher education, particularly in high demand areas. It is, I think it's like some engineering and green tech type stuff. And then I think there's one or two more that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head. If anybody else knows it, feel free to chime in, but I will find the list and share it with you.
Do you know offhand if health includes mental health?
Yes,
Great.
yes,
Thank you.
absolutely. Go
Oh,
ahead, Donna.
Go ahead, Donna.
yeah, I'm sorry, I was unmuting. On that same mindset of the question that was just asked, Alyssa, when we were in at the CAIL conference, they talked a lot about the federal the financial aid that was going to be coming from the federal government and how that was going to be limited based on areas, degrees and jobs that the students would get. How is that connected to, and I'm sorry, maybe I'm taking us a little bit away from the gentleman who's given the presentation, but I'm a little bit concerned that the state has identified these key areas where we need workers, and now the federal government is going to be limiting the federal financial aid that the students can get to those degrees. So is there any kind of a conversation going on to try to get those aligned?
So
I
are
hope,
you
hope
talking?
I'm being clear. I'm terribly inarticulate by Friday.
No, the when you're referring to the federal financial aid, are you thinking specifically of the financial aid for Pell, like
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So I'm not like the expert on this. And if there is, if I, we may have some folks here who are from, their colleges, like, continuing ed and workforce teams who may be a little deeper, in that area. So and what that piece of financial aid, has to do with is really, so that would be like financial aid for non-credit coursework. So that's like
Mhm.
continuing ed offerings. And I don't know as much about the federal financial aid piece of that, but I do know that for TAP for workforce, so that's like, New York State financial aid related to, that would be available for, non-credit coursework. There is a requirement that there be articulation into, college degree programs. So if you're receiving financial aid for TAP, like TAP for continuing ed courses, the assumption, or not the assumption, like the requirement, the criteria is that should you choose as a student to enroll at an institution, that there would be a pathway there for CPL purposes. So there is that alignment in the way that New York State is approaching it. I know a little bit less about the criteria and requirements, federally. Um, and okay, a list of, I'm sorry, I'm just looking at the chat to see if that was answering the question. But so I think that my sort of,
Think she unmuted.
We can't hear you.
me? You
Yeah.
can't hear
Well,
me?
now we can. Yeah, your
Oh, how
audio cut
strange.
out a little
I
bit.
did,
Just for about
weird.
15 seconds.
Oh, like when I leaned back? That was weird. I didn't touch anything. Okay. Thank you for letting me know. I apologize. Let me know if it happens again. But so what I think I was saying there is that, we should and will find out more about, and I know there are a lot of people at CUNY that are very deeply involved in understanding these financial aid opportunities. But I think that it emphasizes that, a lot of the sectors where there is demand, where there is opportunity for this financial aid to help people, advance their learning, whether or not it's within a degree program. I think that's the opportunity that we have to demonstrate that, that what people are being trained in a non-credit setting has relevance to, many degree programs. And CPL isn't going to work every time. You know what I mean? Like there are going to be trainings that are very valuable to the workplace that don't necessarily rise to the level, of college level learning for CPL purposes. But for us to find, and also to think about it from the other side as well, where if there's not alignment with curriculum, is the curriculum due for a refresh and update?
Mhm.
I think that consideration, is also an important piece of the conversation. So without being able to totally respond to your question, Donna, I hope that that's some helpful context.
Yeah, no, I guess, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I'm thinking of the marketing perspective, right? So you have, college A, it will start marketing that, not only do we accept credit for prior learning, for folks who, let's say, have achieved certain types of, I don't know, industry credentials or what have you. Then we could also argue that because this is, these particular, degrees are, and will lead to a career that the New York State considers in high demand. Then can the next layer would be, and we have financial aid to offer you, whether it's via the state or the federal government. Like I'd like to see that pulled together in one like neat package, and I guess
Mhm.
that's probably the goal. Even though I'm not in the marketing perspective I don't have anything to do with marketing at the college, but these to me the mindset, if you want to make an argument, because I think the biggest hill to climb is going to be to convince faculty
Mhm.
that the industry credentials or the outside the credit for prior learning is something that they would consider to be of equal value to whatever it is that they could teach in the classroom. I just
Mhm.
think that getting the faculty buy-in is going to be the toughest. And I don't know if
Mhm.
we're going to talk about that today, but I'd be curious to hear perspective on that. And now I'm
Yeah,
going to
We'll
leave.
definitely talk a
I
bit
think
about that.
I
I'm
think
sorry,
that
Alyssa.
oh no, absolutely same. I think that that is what we hope to offer today. And as we go through the session and get a little more into some of the more examples and hands-on work, is ways of starting to think about that alignment in a very concrete way, and provide some strategies for demonstrating that alignment.
Okay,
Alyssa,
thank you.
Oh,
Go
Amit, go
ahead.
ahead.
yes, thank you. Nice to see Bill and
Good to
Alyssa.
see you.
Great to see you. I attended a similar session. I know this happened in December, but I since then, I've spoken to some of my faculty members and also some people from other CUNY campuses. And what I learned was that I don't know if this answers Donna's question, is that they empowered other faculty members that are experts in certain areas to review the credentials. But my questions, for example, in hospitality and tourism, some of us are experts in tourism. Us are experts in food and beverage. So if a student comes to you and says they want prior credits, prior learning credits, then you can review. But my question was that we could use, my department is thinking about, having a workshop on CPL sometime in May or June to come up with a policy. Now, for
Hmm.
this, we have a lot of people in the industry in hospitality, especially in professional fields, where there may not be a lot of certifications, but they have a lot of experience 5, 10, 15 years. And this could be a recruitment tool for us to get people from the industry. How do we quantify that? Say, for example, we discussed it that say somebody comes with a 5 year experience should not be asked to take an intro to hospitality or tourism course because they already are aware of the industry. So we could give them credits like that. But that policy, but they may not have a certification. They may only have a food handler's license, so they'll get that certification credit. But other than that, it's something that we have to sort of take it one step at a time. But I had two students inquire about their experience being converted into credits. But at this point, we don't have a departmental policy. I just, I said,
Yeah.
submit your resume, submit all your evidence of what you worked, and, we're gonna look through that. That's all I could do. So this is where I think I struggle a little bit. Like, how do we, because I also have to sell it to faculty. Like Donna said, I have to sell it to faculty. Like some of them may not be happy
Yeah.
giving credits to certain, individuals.
Yeah. Well, so this is, I think, a great segue for me to go over some of the CUNY policy that could inform
I
local and
thought the same
departmental
thing. Do you want the
policy.
deck back up,
Yeah.
Alyssa?
Sure. Yeah. That would be great. And I mean, we will come back to this point in just a minute. So I'm not I'm not
Okay,
skirting over your
thank
question.
you.
I will flag for you when I am talking about specifically what I think you're getting at. So just to give a few high level but very important points about CUNY's CPL policy. So this is a policy that was approved by CUNY's Board of Trustees in 2020. So it's been on the books for about 6 years, and implementation has been ongoing since then. All colleges, all departments are at different stages and places with implementation, and that's okay. That's how this works. But a few things that hold true across the board are listed here. The policy jargony language is on the left, and on the right, I have just the points, and these are things I get questions about all the time. So first of all, as Bill has referred to, as is national best practice, and as we have, right out front in our policy, it is faculty who make the decisions about the appropriate equivalencies and credit awards. So that those decisions are made at the academic department level by faculty. So that's one thing that is important to know. Another important point is that CPL credit can be awarded to fulfill major requirements. It can fulfill gen ed requirements, and it can also fulfill departmental electives. So you're looking for the course match that best fits across any of those categories. Also, like blanket credit can be awarded to fulfill gen ed requirements, for example. We could talk more about all of that. One thing to be aware of is that the policy says pretty specifically that general elective credit should be a last resort, and that's because I think we know across many different facets of how you work with students that that students don't often need more general elective credits. They need credits that actually count toward their degree in order for it to hold that value that Bill was talking about in terms of saving them time and money, and not just sort of being like additional credits on their transcript. We also, our policy is really specific that CPL credits do not fulfill residency requirements. So residency requirements are, they vary by college, but those are the courses that, or those are, you know, the number of courses and the types of courses that students have to take at their institution. So another way to think about this is that CPL credits go into that sort of the same bucket as transfer credits. So if you're coming in having previously studied at another institution, you can bring over a certain number of credits, but there is a requirement of a certain number of credits that have to be taken in residence. So CPL credits don't count toward that. And then the last point here, which is super important at CUNY, especially where we know that our students move around the system quite a bit. When students transfer from one CUNY college to another, CPL credits transfer as though the student took the course at the original college. So that course, the way that that course transfers for a student who took that course at the college, that's the same way that it will transfer. CPL credits are not subject to reevaluation by the receiving college. Now, there can be some variability in the way that those credits are applied if the student is changing majors or if the degree program is different, you know, the program requirements are different at the receiving college, but it is not up to the receiving college to say that's no longer valid, that's no longer college level learning, it has to transfer. So I'll pause there to see if there's any questions about those key points of the policy. And feel free to bring up questions about policy at any point. But Bill, if you want to pull it back up, I'll go over some of our mechanisms, and that's where I'm going to come back to Amit's question.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So, our policy refers to 4 different types of CPL mechanisms. The first one listed here, standardized exams. These are required. These CUNY colleges must award credit for qualifying scores on the 6 exams that are listed here. So that means that the policy establishes like minimum threshold scores, and any student who presents a qualifying score should get credit. What that credit is, that's the decision of faculty at the academic department level to decide what the alignment is of a particular exam. Non-collegiate learning, the policy provides that that colleges can choose to award credit for different kinds of trainings and certifications. So this includes industry certifications, professional licenses, employer trainings, military trainings and occupations, continuing ed offerings, and other organized learning experiences where the evaluation is really of the learning experience itself and the decision that's made about how to recognize that with credit. That applies to the certification or the training. So anybody who comes in with that same certification or training would be eligible for the same credit. This is really the crux of what we're here to talk about today is non-collegiate learning. But to Amit's point that he brought up, you know, there are circumstances where you don't have something quantifiable in the same way as like an industry certification, and that maybe there's not an existing standardized exam that a student can be referred to. And in that case, there are these other mechanisms, challenge exams, which can be developed by academic departments to assess learning as it aligns with the learning outcomes of a particular course. So it's a little different than developing like just taking the final exam of that course, but it's more designed to really examine the student's knowledge as it pertains to the specific learning outcomes that are outlined in the syllabus and that are really underlying a particular course. And then there's portfolio assessment, which is a process by which students can actually compile a portfolio that represents their learning as it pertains to those learning outcomes of a particular course. They can do this through narrative, actually writing out how their own experience, their own learning, their own knowledge applies to those learning outcomes, and it can also be supported with evidence. So that can be letters of recommendation from employers, that can be work samples, it can be many, it can take many different shapes. Um, and and so Amit, I think the answer to your question is that if your department is interested and curious about how to potentially award CPL credit to people who have like 5 years or 10 years or some range of amount of experience within an industry, I think an answer could be that people who sort of fall into those categories could potentially be eligible for an assessment, such as a challenge exam, such as portfolio, that would allow them to demonstrate that they're learning through those years of experience. Because it's not so much about 5 years of experience equals this. It's more about the learning that they have amassed through that experience aligns with learning of courses or learning outcomes associated with specific degree programs that would allow them to get some credits on their way in. We do have some plans to offer some support and infrastructure for faculty later this semester that would help them start to develop portfolio opportunities for their department. So stay tuned for more information about that. But we can, today is really about the non-collegiate learning, but it is really important to think about people who don't necessarily have exactly the certification, or maybe they had it, but it's expired and it's no longer really their wheelhouse. Is that worth something? Those are important questions for departments to consider.
Thank you.
Donna, go
Donna,
ahead.
I see you've got your hand up.
Uh,
Yeah, I'm sorry, I have my hand up. Yes, I do. On the issue of the military occupational specialty, right? The MOS. I'm just curious if has CUNY ever tried CUNY as CUNY? Have they ever tried to, my battery's running low, so if I die, this is where I am. Have they ever tried to create some kind of articulation agreement with the military so that individual colleges, sort of like with pathways, right, where there's a for general education, like all of the CUNYs have to accept the same credits and the same courses. I'm wondering, because the military is the military and because there are standard expectations for those positions in the military, shouldn't there be sort of a generalized acceptance of certain of these MOS equate to certain, even if they're gen ed courses?
Mhm. Yeah, so that's a great question, and it is something that we are actively working on. And we also our policy does point to the ACE military guide as a source of credit recommendations that have been developed by faculty from across the country. So that is one way to look at it. But I totally hear your point, and have had many conversations with colleagues at colleges, and we are actively discussing this and working toward a proposal that would bring us to a space where we would be able to say to colleges, for anybody that comes in who has completed basic training or has completed, some set of trainings, this would be a meaningful credit award. And again, it would be up to the department to, based on our policy, it would be up to the relevant academic departments. But our hope is that we can arrive at a place where we have some guidance like that for colleges, because it would be, as of now, I think a lot of what you see if you run a joint services transcript through the ACE military guide, it's a lot of elective credit, and that is not, that's not giving the benefit that we know that students, especially service members and veterans, are looking for. Sasi, I see your hand is up.
I'm sorry, I have a completely different question.
That's okay.
I'm happy to hold it or
Actually,
ask it
we're at a
later.
good Q&A point right now.
Yeah.
So please.
Yeah, Alyssa, so, I'm coming from workforce development and continuing ed department where we, like different workforce development departments across CUNY, actually offer some of these industry credentials in our training programs. And so
Mhm.
as we think about um, getting credit for prior learning for some of these training programs in terms of designing the curriculum for the classes, are we looking to align them, duplicate the ones that are not duplicate, align them with the degree program in the college, right? But we also don't want to position ourselves as competitors to the degree program. So if we're offering a motivational interviewing course, for example, as part of one of our training programs, and motivational interviewing aligns with the human services degree program, but the degree program offers its own motivational interviewing course. Does that put us in conflict? How do we get a program to agree to allow us to do that where it's like, you know, that
Yeah, I mean,
ongoing
I think
conflict between degree and non-degree programs?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to some of the differentiation that that Bill was talking about, where I think it's like if we think about like the overall landscape of training opportunities that exist across New York City, like in the New York City area, and those that are, you know, CUNY, like CUNY colleges offer them. CUNY colleges offer them in a degree setting, in a non-degree setting. You know, down the block there's the for-profit that does it, and across the street is the CBO that offers it, and you know, there's the employer that brings in a trainer that does it. You know, it's like if you think about the fact that we don't really have control over the fact that there are many different ways to to earn lots of different or to receive the training to earn lots of different kinds of credentials. I think that where a continuing ed program and a degree program see that they are serving similar or complementary audiences, to think about that alignment and to see it as fostering a recruitment pipeline. Um, and you know, because if somebody, and this is where I think things like micro credentials become really interesting, because it's like if somebody is, you know, maybe for their job or just out of personal interest, they take a continuing ed course or a sequence of courses, and that's the easiest way for them to do it at the time, rather than they're not ready to jump into a degree program. They don't think they want to go to college, but they do need to do this or want to do this for another reason. If then they are told that, you know, if you decide to enroll in this degree program over here, you can bring these 6 credits in for these two, you know, these 2 courses that you took, and you'll start out 6 credits ahead. And then, you know, that may be very appealing to students. So it's sort of, it's like, yes, there is some level of competition, but I think that there is that level of competition whether or not. And if a continuing ed program and a degree program can be aligned and actually like create a program that has that articulation, then it's something that both can market together, as opposed to, you know, and that's not like a perfect answer. You know, it's not a perfect solution to the challenge that you're talking about. But I think that it's a constructive way to think about the landscape that we're in. You know, so that would be my thinking on that
If
topic.
I could, if I could pick up on this a bit, and really, there's a straight line between this question and Donna's financial aid question a little earlier,
Mhm.
because the the workforce Pell initiative on the part of the federal government right now, which, you know, there's a July 1 deadline for the regulations to be in place. So in some ways, institutions and systems and consultants like me are doing a lot of guesswork based on the initial legislation. But what I can tell you is that in order for an institution to be permitted to offer workforce Pell Grants, the kind of stackability that we're just talking about here is a prerequisite. You have got to be able to demonstrate that there is a stackability between the workforce credential and either a 2 year or a 4 year credential. That is going to require crosswalks by its very nature. It's going to require the ability to translate that non-credit space into a credit-bearing offering on the part of the institution. There's all sorts of other requirements that go beyond what we're talking about here today. But I think your question is absolutely relevant, and it ties directly to the workforce Pell question earlier. In order to be eligible for that, you've got to be able to not only build those crosswalks, but demonstrate the stackability of that credential into of the workforce credential into existing for-credit credentials on your campus. And that's not trivial work. That's going to take some work for sure. Other questions? This is great. Well, I'll tell you what, we are at almost 11:10. We've been at this for a little north of an hour. It's probably a good time for a quick break. Let's take a 10-minute break and reconvene at let's just call it, and let's make it an even number, right? We'll come back at 11:20 and we'll dive into some more work before we take a bit of a longer lunch break. So thank you all for your attention. Thank you all for the great questions. And we will reconvene at 11:20. Thanks, everyone. Welcome back, everyone. You had just a chance to stretch your legs, fill up your water bottle, get some more coffee. Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing the deck. Actually, before I do, are there any lingering questions from our first hour or so together? All right. Well, as promised, this is really going to be for the rest of the time we spend together today talking about crosswalks. I just thought no better way than to show these four lads, and probably one of the most famous crosswalks in really kind of Western cultural history was these guys. So what is this really all about? And we've been kind of hinting at it the whole time we've been together so far. Why bother to do this kind of evaluation? I mean, obviously, there's a financial aid carrot in the term of workforce Pell that we've been talking about a little bit, and certainly also just the general real benefit of credit for prior learning for students, institutions, and communities. But why did workforce credentials suddenly become, like I mentioned earlier, right? For a while, portfolios were really the hottest thing going, but in the last year, the increase in the availability of non-credit credentials is in part driving this. There are so many of these credentials that you can pick up online. And we're going to talk about some of those probably after the break, after the lunch break. But there's just this proliferation of non-credit credentials, and many of which have great college level learning value. But there's a real convenience factor here. And what I've always been fond of saying about them is once you've done the crosswalk, once you've done the work, and we're going to walk through the mechanics of doing this work, whether you take the recommendation from ACE or NCCRS, or whether you do it on your own. Once that work is done, it's done. And what I mean by that is you've established a credit equivalence for a certificate. So how this functions in many ways, it functions like transfer credit. The student comes to you, they have the credential, you look it up, it's like, yes, we offer this amount of credit for the credential, done. It ultimately is that easy. So once it's done, it's done. Well, not entirely. And the reason I say that, and I mentioned this earlier, industries change sometimes very rapidly. And so what that means is that the credentials will change. That, in many reasons, or for many reasons, is why it's important to have that ongoing dialogue with those who are offering the certification, whether it be through employers or whether it be staying on top of what Google is offering for a particular certification, or Cisco, or any of the major tech companies that are offering certifications. Because the last thing you want to be doing is offering credit for something that is obsolete. And I'll just give you a very, very quick example. Many years ago, before I went to graduate school, that was a long time ago, I was certified by OSHA to work on a hazardous waste site. I was OSHA certified to work on a hot site, the fully encapsulating suit, the whole thing. That certification is so old now that there is no way it should count for college level credit, because the technology has changed, because the industry has changed. So that's why having keen faculty subject matter eyes on this, and good working relationships with employers and industries that are granting these certificates, is critical. Doesn't change the fact that once you have that crosswalk in place, it should work just like transfer credit. But industries change, and for that matter, your curriculum might change. So that's why this is more a dialogic process than a one and done kind of thing. These credentials have been around for a very long time. Many disciplines require certification, right? And we have talked around the subject of healthcare in this session quite a bit. There have always been, right, the kind of certification that is required of healthcare workers, of classroom teachers, I think to engineering, right, and the PE, the professional engineer certification. These certificates have been around in many industries for a very, very long time. You may find many individuals who have been in the industry, whatever that industry may be, and have a certificate. Could be in HR, could be in payroll, could be something in hospitality. I love using that particular example. And you may find that that maps on, and I mean that in all seriousness, this becomes an exercise in curriculum mapping, in mapping the outcomes, the student learning outcomes of the certificate onto the learning outcomes of your particular course or courses. Certain industries, of course, require specialized training. So even if someone may have an associate's degree and then they go out to work in a particular industry, they may be required to get additional specialized training as a part of their job. And then if they decide they want to come back and do a baccalaureate degree, how might some of that training translate into a for-credit environment? The rise of work, learn, earn pathways is really in many ways dominating a lot of the conversation right now in higher ed at many state levels. And I don't think New York is an exception to that. Work, learn, earn pathways are critical for returning adults, many of whom are continuing to work part-time or even full-time as they complete their degrees. And so it goes back to that idea that credit for prior learning can decrease the time to degree. Time and money are critical for all learners, but I think especially returning adult learners. Again, it can help to build and sustain that robust employer-educator ecosystem, and it provides learners with enhanced career pathways. All of these things are enormously beneficial for the learner, for the institution, and for the community. So, Alyssa, do you want to talk a little bit about some of this work in detail at CUNY?
Sure. So we put together this slide. We're going to go into a lot more detail about many different aspects of this as we go on in today's session. But I think our policy calls it non-collegiate learning, and we are talking about these types of credentials, licenses, training programs that are listed here on the left-hand side. And there's a question in the chat about whether it has to be something that's like a nationally recognized industry credential, or something that is sort of formally established as such. And it doesn't have to be. It could be that there is an employer that your college has a relationship with, that has a very local focus, but they're doing some type of training that that you're aware of, or that they called upon your institution to help them establish. There's a lot of different shapes that this can take, but whatever shape it takes, there's a few different resources to be aware of for determining that alignment and the appropriate match for CPL purposes. The first piece of that are that we have nationally recognized credit recommendations from a couple of different databases that we're going to go into more detail about. So these are organizations that they convene faculty from across the country to participate in evaluation processes that result in recommendations. And so these are good tools for understanding a much broader context for how certain learning experiences are being recognized with college credit. CUNY's policy doesn't require that you take what the American Council on Education or NCCRS says and apply it directly, but it is a resource. We'll talk a lot more about that. We also at CUNY, we're really lucky as a system. We have the ability to learn from each other's CPL processes and evaluations. We will go into more detail later about CUNY Transfer Explorer as a tool for looking up and seeing what any given college is awarding for certain industry certifications, trainings, et cetera. We also have a practice that we have adopted over the last few years here at CUNY, where for certain types of learning experiences where we know that there is a sizable population of people across New York City who are engaging in that learning experience, we have brought together committees of faculty, representatives from a common discipline, to go through an evaluation process together and come out with a recommendation for CUNY colleges to consider and implement in appropriate departments. So those are a couple of local resources that we have, and we have some other ones that I'll get into more detail about later. But basically, like, we can look to each other so that we are not reinventing the wheel, and so that we can help foster equity and reciprocity in the way that we think about credit for prior learning at CUNY. I think that the third one here, the materials from credentialing organizations, like, this is super important, because even if you see a recommendation or you see what another college has done, the faculty at any given college, they might really want to engage with that material themselves to really understand exactly what exactly what people who emerge with this certification, who go through this training, what they know. And we will also look more closely at what you can do with those types of resources and so I'll give an example, like the American Heart Association. Like, if somebody is earning like a first aid certification or CPR, maybe that's a very straightforward one, but you could actually see from the American Heart Association what's covered, how the training is administered, who is a qualified instructor. All of those kinds of details are things that we should be able to learn from organizations that administer credentials that we're interested in awarding credit for. So that's another piece of this work. And then there are also a couple of nationally recognized resources that establish standards and processes that we can follow, that make us a little more confident that the way that we're approaching this is steeped in best practices. And we will go into more detail about the case standards and the professional learning evaluation processes associated with those, as well as CAI standards. So there's a lot of different resources out there to support this work. And what we're going to go into as we continue on in today's session is sort of like, okay, so here's kind of like a list of the tools. How do we actually use these tools? That's what we're going to be looking at.
Great. Thanks, Alyssa. I could not ask for a better segue here, because we're going to talk about some of these external bodies. And before we take a break for lunch, what I'm going to emphasize are the CASE standards as well as the CAIL standards. CASE is the Consortium for the Assessment of Collegiate Equivalence. Note, of course, the emphasis there on assessment, because really what we're talking about here is assessing prior learning. That is really assessment for collegiate equivalence. They have a list of standards for this kind of work. They're a consortium of higher ed institutions. And then we're also going to talk about CAIL, the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning. They have a list of 10 standards for CPL programs and the kind of work. I'm going to walk through those individually. And I won't read every one of them to you, but of course you'll have access to them. They'll all be here in the deck, and you'll all get a PDF of this deck early next week. But I just want to talk a little bit about what these are and what they are not. What they are recommendations. And I said from the outset, okay, at the end of the day, you're going to be the ones making decisions here. But the good news in all of this is you're not alone. It can be really easy if you're the individual, say, in a department who has been assigned, okay, you're the one who's going to be doing, you're leading our CPL efforts. It can be really easy to find yourself on an island, particularly if you're just getting started in this work. If you're one of those folks, when we did the level setting at the beginning and you had yourself at a 1 or a 2, it can really be easy to start to feel like you're a little isolated in all of this. You need not feel that way. And part of our work here today is to give you access to more resources, because you're not alone in this work. This work has been going on for a very, very long time. And what I have found is that it's a community, and it's a community that is very, very willing to help each other as a part of it. And so let's just kind of walk through. This is just a screenshot of the CASE website. It'll give you an indication of some of the members of the consortium. There, of course, you've got Empire State right there in New York, part of the CUNY system. And what CASE is really involved in is to lay out what they think are the best standards for going about assigning college equivalents to various external kinds of experiences. So when engaging in that learning experience evaluation, okay, the review team assesses. Okay, again, it's that emphasis on the assessment of learning outcomes. The review team assesses if the learning experience is clearly defined, measurable, and appropriate to the intended learning outcomes. Think about this. I have always thought, and this is one of the best lessons I learned about student learning outcome assessment way back when I was a faculty member. And one of I was very fortunate. I was a faculty member at Southeast Missouri State in the early to late 90s. And this is when the whole movement toward assessing student learning outcomes was really picking up speed. It was becoming a big deal on the part of regional accreditors. Southeast Missouri is accredited by the Higher Learning Commission. So HLC was very adamant that institutions that were starting to go through the process of reaccreditation really emphasized the student learning outcomes. And I was very fortunate in our department. It was the Department of Philosophy and Religion. And one of my faculty colleagues also happened to be the associate provost who was tasked with leading the institution's efforts on assessment. And he would come by the department every once in a while as a way of getting away from the administration building every once in a while. And he'd come back to hang out with his philosophy nerds. And he said to us one day as we were just sitting around the coffee pot, and he said, in many ways, what assessment does is that it systematizes what good academic departments do on an informal basis every day. And he's right. Like, take a look at that first bullet point, right? You have these informal conversations with your colleagues all the time. What's working? What isn't working? What needs to be tweaked? Right? This is what good academics do. That's really all you're doing in any kind of assessment. So you apply those same practices and processes to the assessment of non-collegiate learning to determine whether it qualifies for college credit. Outcomes are critical, okay? Outcomes and competency evaluation, okay? The team, notice, Case is always referring to the team. There's no reason to, again, see yourself as being on an island, okay? I have always thought that one of the great strengths of CUNY is that you are working as a system. You're not alone in this work. The team determines if the learning outcomes are consistent. We have a question. Donna, please.
Yeah, I'm confused about why would we need a separate set of SLOs? Why would we need a separate set of student learning objectives for non-college? Shouldn't the students, if we're attempting to give them college credit for learning that happens outside of college, shouldn't they be entering in and going back to these like challenge exams or what have you? Shouldn't those student learning outcomes be the what is used to create the challenge exam? So
Yes. Yes, I did not mean to indicate otherwise. You
okay.
are 100% right. Because think about it. What you're awarding credit for is already in the curriculum. It's
Right.
the learning outcomes that you and your colleagues have determined. These are not different learning outcomes. These are the existing learning outcomes in your curriculum. I apologize if I intimated otherwise.
Either that or I just misunderstood you. It's quite
Yeah,
possible.
it could be me.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. Credit determination, right? Through this review, right? It is you and your faculty colleagues that make the determination based on the breadth and I would also say depth of the learning in terms of making that credit recommendation. And to go back to Donna's point, that it maps onto your learning outcomes. Because this is credit equivalency, a critical factor. And this is actually part and parcel of the CAI standards that I'll talk about here in a bit. You always want to make sure that what you're doing here is equitable, right? You want to make sure that the learning outcomes that you expect students to demonstrate in their external work, whether it's through an industry certification, whether you do a portfolio, whatever the case may be, that learning is equivalent to the learning that a student gets in a residential class and vice versa. Otherwise, you've created an inequity of some kind, and you definitely don't want to do that. So that piece of it is critical. Finally, you want to make sure that you formalize this work. Okay, whether it is in a set of processes, whether it's in a final report on portfolio review or whatever the case may be, you want to make sure that you keep good records, that you make this all in writing, because not only should you be involved in the assessment of student learning, but periodically you want to be assessing yourselves and making sure that these processes are doing what you hope that they'll do and accomplish. This can in many ways be an iterative process. Like I said, this is not something that any of us were really trained in. At least I don't think so. This is something that we're all still continuing to learn. So like I said, CAI also has a set of standards. CAIL is, like I said, the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, long established proponent of credit for prior learning, strong relationships between workforce and educators. Over, as you can see on this screenshot from their website, over 5,000 members. The organization has been in existence now for decades. And they have established what they call the CAIL standards. And I'm not going to bother reading through all 10 of these. These are available for you. They'll be made available. Of course, you can get them on the CAIL website, but you'll have them right here on the slide deck. One of the critical pieces, I think, of the CAIL standards is they're a little more broadly based, okay? And there is an emphasis on equity, there is an emphasis on fairness, and there is really also a real emphasis on the primacy of faculty judgment. And I can't emphasize that enough. And to reiterate Alyssa's point earlier, one of the things that we're going to do after the lunch break is we're going to do a little bit of hands-on work and take a look at what it's like to use the ACE National Guide for getting their recommendations for college equivalents for any number of certifications. And we've got 3 different ones that we can take a look at. We'll let you take some time, go into the website, take a look and practice with that a little bit. But at the end of the day, they're also just making recommendations. You make the final decisions. And so CAIL's 10 standards really do emphasize the primacy of faculty judgment in this work. It is only for evidence of college level learning, not just mere experience. One of the examples I like to give is I've been a drummer since I was a kid, and it's a passion of mine. I don't play in a band. I used to when I was in college many years ago. But it is a real passion of mine. I go up into the attic. I have 2 drum sets up there, and I just love to play and continue to learn. I'm not a professional by any stretch of the imagination. I have experience. I don't think there's any music program worth its salt or its NASM accreditation, for that matter, that would give me credit, and that's fine. But you know, there are a lot of professional musicians out there who could not only earn college credit for their skill, whether it's singing, whether it's playing guitar or the drums, but they can also maybe in some cases be your own studio instructors. So that's that differentiation between learning and mere experience. And where do you make that determination? Faculty experts, unquestionably. The point down at the bottom, this kind of assessment advances the broader purposes of equity and access for diverse populations at your institution. Unquestionably, it opens doors. It is, as one of your colleagues pointed out, noble work. Okay, I'll just point out a couple of more, and then we're going to pause for any questions that you may have on this. Institutions proactively provide guidance and support for learners' full engagement in the assessment process. You need to have conversations with students who are involved in your CPL processes. Now, you might not have as many conversations with these kinds of non-credit credentials, right? They come in, they show you the credential. If it maps onto your curriculum, wonderful, wonderful. You get the credit, hopefully move on, succeed at your institution, everybody wins. Okay, I'd just like to point out the last one of these. Assessment programs are regularly monitored, evaluated, and revised to respond to institutional and learner needs. And I would also add to that, although I'm not a part of CAIL anymore, so I can't recommend that they change this, I would add employer needs, particularly when it comes to these certifications, making sure that you are lined up. This is work that really emphasizes the ecosystemic nature of educators and employers. with learners at the center of all that you do. So with that, let me just pause. This was a lot of material to go through. Okay. Any questions?
Can I make one comment?
Well, absolutely. Questions,
Okay.
comments. The
All right.
floor is yours.
This is probably more for Alyssa than it is for you, but what you said prompted it. Alyssa, wouldn't you think it would make sense? And I wonder if maybe there's some effort to make this happen. But shouldn't there be like a try to standardize this to the best of CUNY's ability? I was thinking about when Pathways was first implemented across CUNY, right? All the colleges had to submit courses, the syllabi of courses, and they had to apply to be able to be put into whichever one of the gen ed buckets, right? So there was an evaluation process, all the colleges, right? Every single CUNY had to come together, they had to submit all their stuff. And there was a team that sat down and evaluated whether or not the course would meet that to be given that sort of uh, categorization as meeting the pathways credentials, and then it could be part of that course. And this way, those credits then move from college to college, and nobody can question anything. Has anybody thought about the possibility of creating something like that for this? I fear this hodgepodge approach to it because I just think it's going to get messy. And if we got so many students who are starting out at the junior colleges or the community colleges, and then having to transfer, it's complicated enough. But I think if we could standardize the credit for prior learning to the best of our ability, it would just make life easier for everybody.
Well, I would say that the concerns that you raise were very central to the university's decision to pursue and create and have the board of trustees uh, support and pass a credit for prior learning policy to begin with, because and so the policy itself is intended to establish a, a degree of standards, like academic standards, and recommended processes by which all colleges should implement credit for prior learning. So our policy, to some extent, and the fact that it does very explicitly protect CPL credits in transfer, aims to address like a piece of what you're raising.
Right.
I think that on the heels of the creation of pathways and all of the experience of so many people across the university in creating that gen ed curriculum and the way that it was implemented, I think pointed to a real desire by faculty across CUNY to maintain their departmental autonomy, like to be like less careful about saying it, I guess. Like, I think that there was a pretty intentional approach to not try to do exactly what Pathways did in order to get a policy in place. I think that the that was I think, but I think there's something in between, right? Like there's something in between, and I think that's what we're working toward. I think that's what we're working toward. I think that when I mentioned the way that we've worked with like committees of faculty from common disciplines, where we have engaged with discipline councils, I think that we are trying to approach this work in a way that asks the people who are sort of across colleges who have the subject matter expertise to talk to each other about this and to aim for some consensus in what they consider college level learning, and to think about the types of industry certifications that they can agree are relevant, appropriate, aligned. So I think that we're trying to do it without necessarily mandating it in the same way that that Pathways mandated it. And I think that um, the other difference that if I can say this in a relatively articulate way, we should all be glad because maybe I'll stumble over this. But what I'm thinking here is that like when you're asking departments to look at their own catalog and identify their own courses that meet like a certain that fall into these certain buckets, like that's like a finite task. It's a big task. It's a complicated task, but it's a finite task. But when you ask departments to identify the relevant non-collegiate learning that may be applicable to their courses, you're talking about like a vast and immeasurable and constantly changing and shifting set of learning experiences that could potentially fall into those buckets. So I think it's like it is by its nature dynamic in a way that can't be like done like to Bill's point earlier, it's like there's always going to be, especially in some of the in like health fields and tech fields and some of these fields where the technology is changing and the standards are changing and there's regulation that drives it and all of those things. And with AI and everything else, that's really across all disciplines. So I think that trying to train and engage faculty in understanding what credit for prior learning is and how evaluation can work. We are attempting to create sort of an environment where when we hear about new things that people are learning in the workplace or learning for the workplace, that we are looking at those as they come and continuing to iterate. So I think it would be great, but I think that the nature of what we're evaluating and what we're focused on is just going to keep changing shape in a way that we can't necessarily standardize perfectly. So,
I guess
you know,
like the low hanging fruit though would be something like the credentials, right? Folks that are coming in with, having gotten a licensing exam or something like that. That should be a standard. That should be a no-brainer, right?
well, yeah, and I think when we issue like recommendations based on evaluation by faculty, we are sort of asking departments to take that low-hanging fruit, to say like we've done the evaluation work, we have guided it, and then there's also like there are some colleges at CUNY. I know we have Holly Broadfoot with us from SPS, for example, where they've really built at SPS and some other CUNY colleges a real institution-wide understanding and trust in things like the ACE credit recommendations and NCCRS, where they look to those sources and they engage with those credit recommendations to make determinations to award credit for those. And that's not something that all colleges or all faculty um, are approaching in that same way. But it's I think, and that's where I think also the idea that we can learn from each other, and we'll get into this a little bit more later in the session, but the way that we can look and see what other CUNY colleges have evaluated and what they're awarding credit for. And if we trust in our colleagues' deep dive and determination, those should also be low-hanging fruit. And we'll get into this more later, but we have pulled data for every college that really shows how all the transfer equivalencies that are coded in CUNY First could potentially, for CPL purposes, but lend themselves to that low hanging fruit. So I think we have some ways to get there. And I think sessions like these and people like all of you who take the time to think about this and to learn about this, could become advocates for grabbing that low-hanging fruit and and pulling those students and saying, yes, we are going to recognize this learning and come on in, and I think that's really what we're hoping to accomplish through much of our professional development.
Great question, and thank you, Alyssa, as always. Any other questions, comments at this point? This has been great. Yes, go ahead, Doug.
Hi. Overall, I'm in favor of CPL. I think it makes a lot of sense. I'm running music at Brooklyn College.
Okay.
You mentioned the drumming earlier, which is exactly what has happened in circumstances for us. And I think that I've only been chair since September, so others on our faculty would know much more than I how this has happened in the past. But I am concerned a little bit that if we expand the CPL, that the evaluation process could add a lot more administrative work for the small number of faculty who are already managing a lot of our programs. And I'm not sure how we can do it in a way that doesn't put an onerous burden on people who are already doing yeoman work for the department.
That's a tough one, and it really is. I mean, let's shame on me for not addressing that earlier, but this is more work, right? This is, and if you're already strapped for faculty, and they're already, kind of swamped with teaching their residential courses, and of course in music, your studios and everything else. It is extra work and it becomes a balancing act. One of the things that I always try to tell folks is be sure to be able to handle whatever influx of demand for CPL you anticipate having, because the last thing you want to do is just put yourselves out there and then, for whatever reason, not be able to keep up with the volume, not do a really good job of it, because then in some ways you've done more harm than good, and you never want to be in that situation. Not being privy to, actually looking at numbers, you're going to be the expert on that. But at the end of the day, that's a critical limiting factor in terms of just what it is that the volume that you're capable of handling. And that would go, I think, for any department, not just music.
I would also I would add to that as we go through today's session and we're thinking about certifications, trainings, that type of thing, and we think about the workload that comes with that. I think it's also important to think about ways that certain when we showed before the four mechanisms, right? They were sort of in descending order of demand on both students and faculty, right? So if there's an exam, if there's like a CLEP exam that a student can get credit for, then we shouldn't be spending our time evaluating the credential if there is an exam that would fill that CPL need. And likewise, just to say that, I think that's why we present all of it, right? Even though we're here to talk about this form today, we want to make sure that that people are aware that if you can do it, if you can tell a student you can take this CLEP exam and we will give you credit for it, that is one way of I think mitigating. But then I think there's also the other thing that I will put a little bit of a plug for. Again, it's when we I am always interested in hearing from departments or individual faculty who have ideas about credentials that should get sort of the CUNY central treatment, right? That we should consider pulling together a committee of faculty from multiple campuses and doing that work to take the burden off of departments. And I would also say that if you come away from today's session with a few ideas of things that you want to follow up with on your campus, Another thing to follow up about would be to advocate to your provost or to leadership or budget office, especially as budgets are being shaped for the next fiscal year, to say, I really think we should do some of this evaluation work. And I think we need to make resources available to make sure that we have some faculty with the right expertise who have the time and space in their work lives to do this. So just to say that and we can talk more about that, or I can talk more about that with folks offline. But I think that it's good to think of yourselves as advocating for, we recognize why this is important. We can point to specific audiences of working adults or people in the workforce in general who we know that we could bring in and that we could serve if we're able to do this work. But to do this work, we need the support of leadership. We need to make sure that people have time. So I think thinking about the advocacy piece of that as you're sort of planning for what it is that you want to do. And I also think that learning to do the evaluation, in some cases, learning what to do with these different resources and how to approach it, it may become something that is less overwhelming and burdensome than it feels when you're.
We're not hearing you, Alyssa.
What was that? Did I go out again?
Yeah.
Yes.
And you're back.
Weird. I'm not touching anything. I don't know.
Yeah,
Thank you for letting me know. I'm sorry.
The internet,
Maybe it's just telling me
knows.
it's telling me you're talking too much. You need to. So.
No, this is great, Alyssa. Thank you so much. And Doug, that's a critical question in this work. Well, friends, we are at the noon hour, and it is definitely time for a lunch break. So I've got just about 12:05. Let's take 30 minutes for a lunch break, and then we will come back and dive right into the hands-on work of going from credential to credit equivalencies. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you in 30 minutes. Have a good lunch.
See you soon.
Thanks, everyone. All right. Before we dive into the details of ACE and NCCRS reviews, are there any lingering questions or comments? Or new questions and comments, I should say. All right. Well, I have done the thing that good instructors and presenters should probably never do, and I have I put a couple of links into the chat. One is for the ACE National Guide, and the other is for NCCRS. And I invite you to explore those. We'll set aside time here in a little bit for you to do so. But if you're familiar with them and want to dive in and start noodling around with it, that's great. But the whole idea behind that will be to just give you an opportunity, if you've never taken a look at it, to just get a feel for what those recommendations look like. So I am going to go back to the slide deck. And we're going to take a look at ACE and NCCRS, what they are, what they're all about. As Alyssa mentioned earlier, both of these are resources for mapping industry credentials onto college credit bearing courses. They are recommendations. They are the considered recommendations of faculty members from all over the country in a variety of different disciplines. And the idea behind it is to lighten some of the load. Remember, I said earlier that you're not alone in this work. There is an entire national community of individuals doing this kind of work. ACE, the American Council on Education, one of the largest, if not the largest bodies that advocates for higher education in this country of all sectors. I was actually in Washington last week for the ACE National Conference. That's always kind of an eye-opening and in some ways overwhelming experience, considering everything that is happening right now in the industry, everything that's happening in our sector, and all of the change. But what the ACE National Guide really is all about is it takes credentials like the ones you see here and maps them onto college level curricula. So what I am going to do is a quick demonstration of what that is all about. So I'm going to stop that portion of the screen share, and I'm going to share my browser window with you. Give me a moment. Okay, and here you can see what the National Guide looks like, and you are wondering, okay, what kind of an equivalence we could look for. You'll see that I already populated this with HasWhopper because that's something that has always interested me because I actually did some work in that area a long time ago. And so you just type that into the search. Then you just go ahead and search the National Guide. And then what will show up is a number of different kinds of HasWhopper training. And so what you can do, and we'll just use the first one as an example, okay, HasWhopper cleanup operations, Texas A&M University Engineering Extension Service, okay, as of course many institutions like A&M have an extension service. And then you just navigate down to read more. And once you click on that, what you will find is a tremendous amount of detail. Okay, so what is this? Okay, it's a course. Okay, it has, ACE gives it their identification number, what version of the course. The organization gets an ID, so you get all of this kind of information. The location that offers it, the length of the training. Okay, you see this is a 5-hour training. Okay, you need a minimum of a 70 to pass. Now, one thing that I would like to point out, and this is a very critical piece here, and this is one of the, and another reason why I chose HasWhopper, not just because it's something that I'm really familiar with. Look at the credit recommendation period on this. From 2017 through 2020. It's 2026 now. When you see that kind of a date, it doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't offer credit, but you should really take a deeper dive to see if this is something that is maybe outdated at this point. And that's why something like ACE is just loaded with this kind of useful information so that you can make the most responsible decision to go back to a lot of the questions that have been percolating here already. And one of those, how do you allay faculty concerns about the quality of this work? This is one way of doing so, is to make sure that this is very much up-to-date work. So you can continue to scroll down, okay? Credit recommendation and competencies, okay? Lower division, baccalaureate, HasWhopper training. Lower division, baccalaureate, hazardous materials management. So they're going to give you recommendations and then a whole lot of information underneath as to why that is the case, the topics that are discussed, the instruction and assessment techniques. So there's a lot of information to be had here. And so what I would like to do is just I'd like to take about 10 minutes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the slide deck now in terms of the screen share. And what I'd like for you all to do, okay, you've got the link to the National Guide. Okay, here are some areas that were chosen based on some of the interests that you described when you registered for this. Doesn't mean you have to do these. These are definitely worth looking at. CompTIA A plus, obviously in the IT industry, certified ethical hacker. That's another example of that. If you can think of another one you'd like to take a look at, please do so. What I'd like to do is take about 10 minutes, have you just noodle around in the National Guide, and then we're going to come back and just have a conversation. What did you look at? What did you find useful? What was problematic? And then any kinds of questions that you may have. So, are there any questions before we take about 10 minutes to look at the National Guide?
I have a quick question.
Please.
When you say that I'm just curious, when ACE or whoever puts up this information for a course, is it possible to be able to know who the experts were who reviewed and created this? Because very often, faculty in their fields or the disciplines often know who's who, and so
Sure. I am not aware that is something that you can get a hold of readily. Alyssa, I don't know if you know otherwise on that. I've never thought to dive into that, but I think it's an interesting question.
I also am not aware that the like identities of the people who are involved in the evaluation are made publicly available. I will say that if there are faculty that are sort of interested in the process, are interested in possibly like serving as evaluators, if they look at it and they're like, who's doing this, they could do it. We could make introductions, and we'll hear from Ted Ingram from our team later about his experience working with NCCRS on an evaluation. But that's not part of what the information that they publicize or that they publish. But if there are faculty who sort of want their own hand in it, that's something I know that they're always looking for faculty to participate. Holly, I see your hand is up. Great to see you.
No, I was just, they don't let you know who the faculty are. They give a general guideline on their website of things like it's a team that does the assessment. They have to have at least 5 years of experience, etc. But I think another way of talking with our own faculty about something like ACE is, one, it's already in the policy. But ACE is basically the evaluator for all, on the same presence as saying middle states. It is the evaluator. They are the ones that do all the evaluation for military. They're the ones who do the evaluations for CLEP. They're the ones who do the evaluations for AP exams. So if you're going to accept them in one area, you kind of need to accept them in the other. But there's not a more important or bigger or more recognized group than ACE. And I'll quickly add, one of the things we run into is a difference between when we're evaluating a certificate and when you look in ACE, because ACE costs something like $20,000 or $25,000 for an evaluation. It's expensive, which is why it's limited somewhat. So there will be sometimes a provider who is doing the training, but not the certification itself. And we differentiate those two. So we will look at something and we will grant certification, we will grant and evaluate the certification itself. But if the certification is done like Skillsoft, there may be other groups that do training or will help someone pass an exam, and Skillsoft paid money to have their training that leads to a certification evaluated, but it's not the actual certification. And so that's the kind of the thing we look at and run into. There's some pieces like the Google certificates, those are evaluated, but they're only offered through Coursera. So those are linked. But that's kind of the thing I always have to double check is ACE evaluating a single training provider that happens to be doing the certification, or are they doing the certification itself? And for us, we make a distinction. That doesn't mean anybody else needs to, but that's just the big distinction we make when looking at them.
Yeah, that's super important. Thank you, Holly, for bringing that up. I think it's a nuance to what you're looking at there, and that's why, you know, the information that it provides can still be very helpful and very useful to look closely at and to understand, even if ultimately what your faculty are comfortable awarding credit for would require that they look at the specific training that they are, or the specific certification if that's not what's been evaluated. So I think that's a really good distinction. And I see we have a question in the chat, which
I was just about to address that myself. Do you want to address it, Alyssa?
I haven't read it all the way through yet, so give me a minute.
Sure.
Give me a minute to read it. And people can be like doing their noodling in the national.
Oh yeah, feel free.
Yeah. Just an example shown.
Let me.
Yes. Okay.
I'll
so,
say. Let me say something. Can I say something real quick about the because we've run into this with expired.
Absolutely. Thank you, Holly.
If it's a training that's expired, that's kind of up to you, and you can still take it even after expiration. The period is really because ACE is saying we want you to pay us more money to evaluate this again. On one hand, and the other hand is about every 4 years or so is a good time to reevaluate something. The difference is, though, if it's like a CLEP exam or an AP exam, if it's an exam, when that evaluation runs out, oftentimes those companies may remove that exam until either ACE has done its reevaluation or they make an agreement and you'll go in and you'll see it's been extended for like 2 or 3 months. That particularly happened during COVID when they got behind. But if it's an evaluation ends for something like a CLEP exam, it may be there may not be an issue between a student being able to take it because a new evaluation is there's not going to be a disconnect between the old and the new dates. But we have run into issues where an exam was reevaluated, but there was a 4-month lag. And that those exams were taken down from like the CLEP websites, and another exam provider we use their website. And so students could not take that exam. So we're very careful, and we put information on our website saying to students, we log it, but notice the evaluations for exams, because when that ends, the provider may take the exam down until the new evaluation's been completed.
Got it.
And you don't have control over that. If it's a training, obviously you can just say, yeah, we'll keep taking it. But the exam piece can really hit students if they're using it to graduate.
Thank you. We'll take another minute or two to play around, and then what kind of questions or comments do you have on using the guide? All right. Any other thoughts on ACE? Just like anything else, these are recommendations, and worth keeping that in mind always.
I think it's always worth checking. Like if you're thinking about awarding or like you're considering awarding credit for a certification, it's worth a search to see what it says, to see if it's been evaluated by ACE currently or in the past. So it's a really good resource to just have at your fingertips. And the military guide is like a whole other animal that we have done
Right.
trainings on and we will do trainings on again. But just definitely very good resources to know about in this space. And to Holly's point, really, just an organization and resources really just at the center of CPL work.
Okay. Well, if there is nothing else on ACE, what I'd like to do is just give you all a quick introduction on NCCRS before I go ahead and turn things over to Ted. Give me a moment here. I actually want to share my browser here. Just one moment. Okay, here we go. Here is the NCCRS site, the National College Credit Recommendation Service, NCCRS. It is not as large as ACE, but it is nonetheless another recommending body. The evaluators are, like ACE, faculty members who are subject matter experts in the particular area of the particular certificate and so on. One of the real advantages of NCCRS, and I put their link in the chat as well, although we're not going to take the time to walk through NCCRS because we're lucky enough to have someone with NCCRS evaluative experience with us today. And when I turn things over to Ted here in a minute. But what I would like to point out to you is some very specific kinds of credentials that you can look up. And so, not surprisingly, I wanted to take a look right there in the city of New York, and you can find an evaluation of New York City Police Department training. And if you were to type into the search NYPD, and that's what this brought up here, just for the sake of argument, it walks you through a plethora of information. Okay, they are an NCCRS member for a long time, as you can see, well over 30 years. Actually, I'm sorry, well over 50 years. I can't do my math today. And I'll scroll down a little bit more. Look at the variety of training that is evaluated by NCCRS just from the NYPD. And we'll just choose the first one here. We'll take a look at school safety officer course. Okay. And here, same kind of thing. It walks you through the detail of what the course is, how long the course has been offered, gives you, really, really great detail, right? How is the class delivered? How long has this particular version of the course been offered? As you can see, it's been offered quite a long time. And you can just scroll through a tremendous body of information about what the course is all about. You've got procedural law, school police field problems, just a variety of information here. Okay. So again, this is yet another resource that is available to you for this kind of evaluative work. And it can be helpful even if, and just like with ACE, even if you're going to do the crosswalk on your own, which is really going to take up the bulk of the work that we're going to be doing for the rest of the time we spend today. It's not a bad resource to look at because it gives you the considered eyes of a set of your colleagues nationally while you're beginning to do the work locally. So it's definitely, I highly recommend it. It's a good opportunity to just get another set of eyes on a particular issue or on a particular credential. And speaking of another set of eyes, I am really just thrilled Really thrilled that we have Ted Ingram with us. Ted, I'm happy to drive the deck for you, but I'll just turn this portion of the program over to you.
All right, thanks. Yeah, if you could press aside when I indicate. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ted Ingram. I'm a professor of early childhood education at Bronx Community College. I've been there about 15 years. And this year I was pretty fortunate to earn a position of fellowship with CUNY Central, particularly in the Office of Credit for Prior Learning. And they really value my feedback as faculty because you get to uh, have your opinion or input as a faculty member, which helps the process. So I'm spending the whole year with Office of Academic Affairs. I'm relieved of my teaching responsibility, so no more department meetings, no student excuses, things like that. But I get involved with a lot of cool stuff. And one of the cool stuff that I participated with last month with NCCR's evaluation of City Year. That was in February 2026. The team consisted of a rep from NCCRS, three faculty members besides myself, one faculty member from St. Joseph University, another from Empire State University, and another from Woodmont College. We had the opportunity to go to the financial district, to City Year's headquarters downtown, and we met with managers and regional directors from throughout the country representing City Year. Next slide. As Bill mentioned, NCCRs has their standards and set of criteria they utilize when conducting evaluation. So they try to understand who and what is the organization, have information regarding to the course as far as modality, time, location, things like that. And they're trying to understand who the instructors are, had they had proper and adequate academic preparation. And number four, try to understand who the students are, the profile and the demographic background of the student learners. And number 5 and 7, the learning experience as a whole, right? Are their learning outcomes? Are they rigorous? Is this educational outcome? This out of the classroom learning, is that comparable to higher education? Is it not? Is it just training, or it has like theoretical underpinnings associated with like traditional classroom learning? So those are the kind of things. And then again, is there opportunity for reflection? So our participants have the ability to offer feedback and input. So those are kind of standards that NCCRS has to look at. Next slide. To give you a glimpse of City Year, right? I know in my time, I've seen City Year participants on the train going through the neighborhood, and I'm like, who these guys in red jackets? And they most recently, at one point, they had on Timberlands, but now I think they've updated their uniform to black pants and sneakers and everything. But City Year is a service organization that's been around for about almost 40 years and have these partnerships with K through 12 schools in hopes of improving academic performance for the student learners. But City Year itself, the organization has this whole school, whole child model in which their student success coach, which are these 18 to 25-year-old young adults who go into the schools and provide support to young learners in a holistic model. So it's like academic as well as personal, emotional, those type of support. City Year has 2 learning experience where the success coaches learn and embrace this whole school, whole child model, and they apply it to their learners, right? There's 2 tracks associated with this whole school, whole child model. There's a 1,200-hour course, which runs about 8 months from October to June. The student learners, they are employed 35 to 40 hours a week. The other track is a 1,700-hour course, again, year-round, 11 months, and they also do 35 to 40 hours a week. Both programs have the same learning outcomes, both have program evaluation, both have same evaluation methodology. The only difference is the time commitment of 17 versus 1,200. And when we were there at the day down at Financial District, the administrators and the team, they provided this whole day performance in which they provided all these artifacts. We met with the student success coaches. We learned their stories. And, the managers shared different things of academic things. So like the rubrics, the grading scale, student portfolio, all the information that's associated with City Year. And after they had their presentation, a 6-hour day presentation, we reconvened as evaluators, all of us, and then we offered suggestions that will make college course equivalency for City Year. Next slide. I think it's one thing. Okay, yeah. So the following items were reviewed by our team to verify the standards established by NCCRS were met. The city year instructors, and admin team regularly review the curriculum as a team and made adjustments as necessary. We recognize that the instructors are very much qualified. They're respected in their subject matters and definitely demonstrate a passion towards their learning and the mission of City Year. City Year holds stores records and data while limited access only to authorized personnel. Students have the ability to offer feedback reflections about the program as well as learning throughout the process. The student recruitment is very rigorous and appropriate for the selection of learners that they employ. There's transcripts that are maintained and can easily be customized and ordered if need be. The learning outcomes were clearly stated, deemed rigorous and appropriate for the type of learning that took place. Next slide. So it was noted that there's several institutions that already award college credits for City Year program attendees, and these are the institutions, providing that the participants have at least 1 year of service, they're able to go to these different institutions to gain credit. And you'll see that they're available at the undergraduate and or the graduate level. Illinois Institute of Technology has 3 credits for their MBA and the MPA program as listed as such. Southern New Hampshire University allow up to 6 credits for 100 level English class for the undergraduate level, up to 600 credits at the 500 level at the graduate education courses. And University of Massachusetts Boston has a graduate course that also participants could gain credits for at 3 credits. Okay. Overall, the evaluation team agreed that City Year program merits college credit recommendation. As you'll see, the 1,200-hour program can earn up to 9 semester. Participants can earn up to 9 semester hours in interdisciplinary studies. So that's 3 credits in applied learning and positive youth development, 3 in a public service leadership, as well as 3 more in educational studies, kind of the supportive practice and diverse environment. And similarly, the same is true for the 1,700 course, right? The only difference is that there's a push for 4 credits because of the time dedication. So there's 400 or about 500 more hours associated, so it's worth a credit. And these, again, just recommendations, right? Other recommendations that kind of came from City Year that we suggested for City Year is to create course names, numbers, so to distinguish like the 1,700, the 1,200, the 1,700-hour course, right? So we suggested they create course numbers, course names, and create a syllabus, as well as create a transcript to reflect this type of educational experience, right? So I think a lot of these, City Year had a lot of the ingredients, but it just needed a formatting that could make it a little bit more reflective of higher ed. So that was like one of our great takeaways. Next slide. So, what does that mean, right? So making this more CUNY central, I took NCCR's recommendation and brought it home to CUNY to identify courses that could be equivalent at our home base, right? And doing my research, I came up and saw that SPS, no surprise, right, has Education 200 course, child development from birth to 5 years old. And here's a description of the course that kind of encapsulate the experience that we heard from the City Year administrators and things like that. So that's a course here that applies to the Applied Learning and Positive Youth Development. It's here at SPS Education 200. And you can see that description. Next slide. And although there was no direct existing course for public service that exists at CUNY, I was able to come across and find out the educational equivalencies at the undergrad level for supportive practice and diverse environment is available at Hunter as well as Brooklyn College. And one, as you see, is more on the undergraduate level at Hunter, and then Brooklyn College has a greater at the graduate level, sorry. So those are type of findings that was able to kind of easily do and see that they're great matches. So if CUNY wanted to take part in such experience, it's kind of already established and it's already beneficial for city year participants. Sorry. All right. I think that's it. Hopefully you found this helpful, but it was pretty simple to kind of do.
Thank you so much, Ted. I think it's really interesting to. Oh, Bill, were you speaking? I'm sorry.
No, all I was going to say is let's take a moment to see if there are any questions.
Yeah.
But Alyssa, I think you were already headed that direction.
Yeah, well, certainly jump in with questions. I really appreciated talking to Ted about this when he came back from the experience, and also hearing about it in more detail today, because I think it kind of it pulls the curtain back a little bit to see like what the standards are that underpin the NCCRS evaluation process and the types of information that informs it, and then what will presumably eventually emerge from that process will be one of those listings like the NYPD one that Bill was showing. And at that point, what do you do with that information? And Ted has already done a little bit of that, that digging into, well, what kind of courses do we have across CUNY that could potentially be CPL matches? So that's, I think it's cool to have Ted's perspective. I think it's also really interesting to hear that part of the committee's feedback is that there are some things that City Year could do to make themselves like more well established for CPL purposes. So it's nice to understand that it's an evaluation process, but it's also a dialogue with the organization. So those are really great insights into what this amounts to. And I think that I will stop for a minute to see if anybody has any questions or thoughts about that. Maybe there's something in the chat here. Okay, good. Okay. So one thing that I think, Ted and I had talked about, and we talked about with Bill as well, is, so Ted's showing us, Bill, do you mind sharing? Actually, you know what? I can share, or you can share for a minute.
It's your call.
Yeah, go ahead and share just the one, the slide 50 with the possible CUNY equivalent courses.
One moment.
So, these are some courses that, based on Ted's own experience going through the evaluation process and seeing sort of where the committee was landing, these are some courses that could possibly be considered by these colleges to align with some of the courses that NCCRS will be recommending. So, I think that the takeaway here for CUNY purposes is that if we have one or two colleges that end up deciding to award credit for City Year based on the NCCRS recommendation. There are other CUNY colleges that can benefit from the first few colleges, decision making. And I actually, Bill, now I will share my screen if that's okay with you. And this is what brings us to the value of Transfer Explorer. Are you guys able to see that okay? Yeah. Okay. So, can I just ask quickly before I dive in here, by a quick show of hands, how many people here are familiar with Transfer Explorer for CPL purposes? Okay, I see a hand. I see a shaking head. Couple people. Okay, so basically, we're familiar with T-Rex. It utilizes CUNY First data for us to understand different transfer equivalencies across the system. It also has this non-CUNY courses, trainings, and exams function that allows us to also see, we can search by specific non-collegiate learning experiences that have been evaluated by one or more college to see how those are awarded credit. And I am going to do a quick search to show an example. So some of you may be familiar with the Child Development Associate credential. So that's a credential in, okay, so this is actually going to prove my point. The count. Okay, so this is where it gets a little tricky. So CDA is the abbreviation for it. So I'm going to search for that. I'm searching across all CUNY colleges. I'm going to search like all three of these different types of certifications for this, and we're going to view equivalencies here. Now, this is a certification that we actually did have a committee of faculty from across the university in early childhood education participated in an evaluation process, came up with a recommendation. So a number of colleges have implemented that recommendation. And here you can see, based on the results, Baruch College has not evaluated any of these. There are not existing recommendation, or they're not existing equivalencies for it. But at BMCC, if you come in with a CDA certification, you're going to be eligible for these two courses. You see this and here. Sometimes that's an or if it's one course or the other. And you can see the same is true at Bronx Community College, College of Staten Island, LaGuardia. There's a couple more examples over here, School of Professional Studies. So that information, if you are a college that has an early childhood ed program and you recognize that people who hold CDA certifications are a good population for you to target for recruitment purposes, and you're not awarding credit for this certification, but you see that other colleges are, you can use the more traditional function of Transfer Explorer to see how those courses transfer to your college. So I won't spend our time doing that right now, but you can sort of extrapolate that, like, you can learn from what other colleges have done. But there's another tool that I want to share with you for these purposes. I'll pause for a second if anybody has any questions about that use of TREX. No? Okay. Okay. So hold on, there's some comments. Share my screen, I get concerned that I'm missing something in the chat. But at any rate, so let's say that you are computer science faculty member and you want to know, are there other CUNY colleges that are awarding credit for trainings or certifications related to like the Python programming language? So you're going to search across all colleges. You're going to go to trainings and exams. You're going to type in Python and nothing comes up. And so that could mean that nobody awards credit for Python, or it could mean that you don't really know what you're searching for, right? Like maybe you know what you're searching for, but you're not able to see it all by typing it in. So recognizing this limitation of how Transfer Explorer works, and knowing that we have access to CPL data from all across CUNY, our office this year put together the CUNY Data Landscape Report. I'm actually going to, before I do this, I'm going to just make sure okay. Bear with me for 1 second. Okay, so the CUNY Data Landscape Report, this pulls from CUNY First data, and it offers college by college reports of all CPL and transfer rules that are configured in CUNY First. And this gives colleges the opportunity to see all the CPL opportunities that are available at your institution. And it also allows you to see how other learning experiences that your college hasn't evaluated, but other CUNY colleges have evaluated, how those courses transfer to your institution, so that you would be able to see that if another CUNY college is awarding credit for something, like how is the credit that they award, how is it already transferring in for students who are just taking the course, and how is it transferring in for people who receive the CPL credit. That comes back to, I think, what Donna was talking about before around low-hanging fruit and the ability for us to really learn from each other's CPL and build upon each other's CPL to create more robust offerings across the board. But again, it's like to search your department's catalog, and I'll show you in a minute how to access those reports for your individual college. But it points to that same issue where the searching for something when you don't know exactly what you're looking for, it becomes cumbersome. You don't know that you're finding everything that's out there. And I saw earlier today somebody put a question in the chat about like I don't want a database. I want a list. Okay. So we hear that request. We have heard that request over time. And so what we have done is we have also set up discipline-specific CPL opportunity catalogs. And so that is, I'm going to show you those in a second, but essentially those provide, actually, I will just show you now. Hang on one second. So this is our university credit for prior learning group in Teams. Anybody is welcome to join this group. So if you're not already part of this group, let me know. It will be included in the slide deck how you can contact me to see if you don't have access to the links that are in there to this information. And we're working on figuring out if there's a better place for us to store these that would be easier for people to access. But in the opportunities catalog, you can see that we have created documents that span many different disciplines. And if you open up any one of these catalogs, you will see that it just gives a rundown of all the different organizations and trainings and certifications that have been evaluated by at least one CUNY college. And we intend to update this on a regular basis. So it's not perfect, we're not updating it in real time because it's created manually. But what we're hoping that colleges can do with these catalogs is if you're in a modern languages department, for example, you could look at that catalog and just see a list, and probably some things on that list are going to be familiar to you. You know them really well. You have worked with them for a long time. Some of them may be surprising to you, or maybe just things that you hadn't necessarily thought of for CPL purposes before. So we've made this available based on hearing the need for it to be easier to understand what's available across the university. And we really hope that this is helpful. And for folks who are interested in learning more about how the landscape report works, how to access it, we have a guidance memo, and we also did a session on this that was recorded. So you're welcome to access those or reach out to us at any time to gain access to these materials. We also would totally appreciate any feedback, questions, ideas for continuing to improve these resources. They're new. We just launched them in December. So we are really excited about them, but we also really want to continue to refine them. So I will pause to see if there's any questions at this point, but feel free to reach out separately as well. Okay. And checking the chat to see. Oh, incredible. Oh, thank you, Joan. We think it's incredible too. Okay. So, and if you think that's incredible, wait till you see this. We have a forthcoming tool that CUNY's Institutional Research Office is developing that's going to link New York State Department of Labor data to CUNY SIP, to SIP codes associated with CUNY degree programs. And we also had a session where our colleagues from ORIDA gave a demonstration of how this is going to work. And this is going to be a tableau, so it will be available for anybody to use to poke around and see. And I think that this has really interesting implications for CPL purposes because I think that if you think about the different occupations that are out there where people are working, and you can understand more from the DOL data about, which positions require or are likely to to have a degree associated with them and which ones do not have a degree associated with them and what the projected growth is for those different occupations, you can kind of unpack some of that and think about how can we recruit these people? How can we make sure that we're bringing them into our degree programs and we're preparing them for the next step and for the next step in their career path where there is growth opportunities, where there's fall off. So it's really interesting. There's going to be a lot for us to learn from this. And this sort of is like, today we're talking really about like crosswalking and creating CPL opportunities. And this is almost like pointing to a step that comes before that, where you have to actually figure out like, what could we potentially award credit for? So definitely keep an eye on this. More information will be coming soon, but it's really going to be a very useful and interesting tool. I don't have a lot more to show or say about this right now, but I'll pause again in case there's questions. Has this been shared with admissions? I don't think that it has been specifically shared with admissions, but I think that when it launches, it will be very widely shared with many different audiences and they'll demo it. And I know that they're really interested in feedback and input to continue improving it as well. So yeah, I think we'll hear a lot more about this in the next couple of months.
Yeah, Alyssa, one of the things I was trying to, when you showed T-Rex earlier, I was thinking about this because I think you shared this in the last CPL workshop that we had, and we who attended got a demo of it. And I was thinking, well, how do they relate to each other? But you're saying the one that's currently being built to use that first in terms of thinking about the wider picture of the market and where the market
Yeah.
is headed, and then the T-Rex in terms of the actual CPF credit for prior learning for whatever the credential is or the course is. Is
Yeah,
that accurate?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one way to think about it is, when departments are proposing new courses or new programs, there are I know that part of that is really thinking about like the labor market demand, right? Like who are you preparing or like what career paths are you preparing students for, right? And this is sort of inviting you to think about it also on the way in, so who could you establish CPL opportunities for that you could look out to the wider workplace and say, hey, come to our college because you can get credit here and you can be prepared for that next step. So it's sort of helping bridge some of those gaps. And it's not like a perfect tool for like you can't like run your search and come up with the answer on the CPL thing, but you can pull the data that can help you make informed decisions about that. So yeah, it's very interesting. I think it'll be really useful going forward. And Bill, I think I'll hand it back over to you to kind of level set a little bit for moving into our crosswalking
Yes,
example.
I'm going to do a very quick level set because I cannot believe that it is almost 1:30 already. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I am going to go back to sharing the deck. I have skipped over some slides because we've already had a good in-depth conversation on some of it. But of course, you're all going to get the whole slide deck anyway. So I have jumped ahead in the deck just a little bit, Alyssa and Ted, just to give you a heads up. So I'm just going to walk very quickly just to kind of re-emphasize the importance of the faculty role. If you've got colleagues who have misgivings, before I turn things back over to one of your faculty colleagues who's going to really walk through some of the nuts and bolts of actually doing a crosswalk, take a look at this bulleted list, okay? So much of this looks like work that faculty already do. It's just put into a CPL context, right? You're advising students, you're designing curricula, you're assessing learning outcomes, you're guiding performance demonstrations of students, okay? You're evaluating the work. You're just, like I said much earlier, right? This is just expanding the umbrella of faculty work. Now, when I say just expanding the umbrella, I'm mindful of our colleague from music. This is not trivial, and this is more work. But it is nonetheless work, although in a different context, that is still work that faculty have been doing and should be the ones making the critical decisions. Okay. So just to reiterate, right? Credit for prior learning of any kind. And in particular, as we take a look at going from industry credential to credit-bearing course, the whole idea is that it moves beyond general knowledge, right? It combines the practical and the theoretical, just like you would in a residential course. Going back to Donna's point about learning outcomes, the learning outcomes don't change because you're awarding credit for a course. Those learning outcomes are in your syllabus, determined by you and your colleagues. So those learning outcomes are what carry the day. It encompasses requisite breadth, depth, and complexity, just like a residential course would. And it has to be, think about this, right? It has to be found in the college curriculum, right? You can't award credit for something that is not in the curriculum. Okay. So before I turn things back over to Ted and Alyssa, who will really just, we're going to walk through what that curriculum mapping, that do it yourself crosswalk is really all about. Are there any questions at all before I turn things back over to your CUNY colleagues? Well, Ted, and Alyssa, I'm going to give the floor back to you, and I am happy to be the person who navigates the deck for you.
Ted, do you want me to start out and hand over to you, or yeah, that's fine. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So, we've talked about, there's the ACE credit recommendations, NCCRS. Maybe you're looking at what other CUNY colleges have done. Maybe you are looking at a particular organization that you have a partnership with, or that is training students that are coming into your institution. But what do you actually do? Okay. So we're gonna show you a couple of different ways to approach this. So here, just as an example, we are showing you Change Up Learning is a training platform from an organization called Change Impact. They do professional development for a lot of different youth serving organizations. So think of after school programs and summer camps and even for the Department of Education. So they have a lot of people who are working in the field who are using their training. In some cases, these are mandated trainings that people have to do. Every 3 years, they have to do a certain number of hours, that type of thing. Maybe their employer is paying for them to do it. And a lot of the content that is trained, that Change Up Learning uses, is college level content. It's actually, in some cases, content that is being taught, for example, at SPS's youth studies program. And we know that because actually the leader of Change Impact is actually also an adjunct at SPS. And so she really kind of pointed out for us that there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of real alignment between the content that people are getting through this non-collegiate learning experience and what she actually teaches in the classroom. With that said, we've had a few colleges that have actually gone through the work of evaluating sets of modules from Change Up Learning to determine alignment. So if you have a syllabus like you see here, and then you have this content that you see on the left-hand side here, how do you actually match these up? Bill, if you can go to the next slide, please. So we had been working with a crosswalking template that this is a picture of what it looked like. And basically, you would put the learning outcomes in that were part of the training organization's materials on one side, and then you would start to match in the learning outcomes from the course syllabus. But this was really clunky. We used it for quite a while, but we are sort of transitioning to a new and improved version of this. If you can go to the next slide. So we now have a crosswalk. It's still the template is still in Excel, but it is configured in such a way that you can have your list of learning outcomes associated with the training course on one side, and then you can have the learning outcomes associated with the particular course that you're looking at for evaluation purposes on the other side. And then you can actually use a drop-down menu in that yellow column there to select which of the learning outcomes line up against which of the elements from the training program. And as you select from the red list via the yellow list, only the items that are not yet selected appear in this gray column. Bill, I'm going to share my screen so that I can kind of show folks this in action.
Fantastic.
Quickly. Okay, can folks see my file here? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So you're looking here. I'm gonna do this quickly. So you're over here. You see childhood ages and stages. In this case, you can actually you could click on this to go out and actually like see more information about that module and really understand what's covered there. And maybe you're gonna select from the drop down. You're gonna say, okay, this demonstrates knowledge of various methods of observation and how they collect data. So you select it there. It turns green here, so you know that it's covered. So you can imagine this is like a pretty short list of learning objectives, but you can start to, whoops, I picked the same one by accident, but it's okay to pick the same one if they line up against them. But then you end up on the other side here with a list of what is covered in this course that's not actually covered by this training experience. And that becomes really useful for identifying like gaps and really establishing to what extent does somebody who has gone through this bundle of modules, they have mastery of the content that they would need to receive credit for this course and to successfully move forward in course sequences in that program. So this is a really useful, we think this is a useful new adaptation of this tool, and we're actually working to try and build this as something that is web-based that would be even more user-friendly than Excel. But we're gonna give you give me 1 minute here. We're going to give you an Excel file that's set up with 4 different versions of this template. And we're also going to give you syllabi from 3 different courses and then 1 syllabus that's related to CUNY's flexible core gen ed learning outcomes. And we're going to try to give you guys a little time to fool around with this, see what it looks and feels like, and to see how it's useful, because I think this is a really good way to sort of understand like what you would actually do to do this evaluation work and this crosswalking work with a credential or training and course that's relevant to your discipline. So I'm going to put these materials in the chat here. Hopefully this will work. Oh, one of them won't be, oh, I have to close this before you can use it. That's okay. All right, so there are the sample syllabi. And this is the sample crosswalking tool. And then if the descriptions are similar but not exactly the same, can we manually mark them as equivalent? I think so, yes. Like I think you can, there's actually, there was like a hidden on that version. There was a hidden column that was a space for notes. That you could just type into to sort of note where something is almost aligned or a little bit different. And really it's a tool for your use, right? It's not something that you submit for approval. I mean, you talk about it with your department, you decide that it's appropriate, matched, and you follow the appropriate campus governance to get it established as a CPL opportunity. But this is really just a tool. So if it's, and as you're poking around with it, and after the fact, if you want to sort of workshop it with your colleagues, we would be very open to feedback for ways that we can make it more useful as we continue to develop it.
How much time would you like to take, Alyssa?
Maybe we give people like 10 minutes.
Yeah, we definitely got that time.
And I would also encourage people, like, as you're looking at the syllabi, we've pulled in the learning outcomes, but there may be other content there that like you would put in, like those are the learning outcomes, but maybe there are things that you would see as, well, we would want to make sure that they also knew how to do this, even though it's not explicitly named in the learning outcomes. You want to think about stuff like that and just what you could, because before we had these populated versions, what we did in December, for example, during this session, was we shared a crosswalking template and a syllabus, and we sort of left it to people to populate it themselves. So it's a little bit, we've done some of the work, but did we do the right work? Is there a different way to think about it? Ted, I don't know if you have anything to add there. I know you've done some of this crosswalking work pretty recently with your.
I mean, yeah, I think a good question about if there's some similar but not exact equivalency. Like I know, like in our courses, there's theories that we kind of lean on and talk about, like Burfenberg, Vygotsky. But I come to think that other courses may pick up some stuff that's not covered or mentioned in this particular scenario. So think open that this course is not all a catch-all. There's other other disciplines that kind of own in on some stuff that's maybe lacking. So just want to share that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's important. And also it doesn't have to be 100% match. I think like the national standard is that it's like 70 to 80% match.
Exactly.
Because if you think about it, like a student who gets a C in the course is getting credit for it. So if somebody is demonstrated mastery of like 70% of the content, that is, from an equity standpoint, an important consideration.
Here, here. So shall we take about 10 minutes?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. I'll pause the recording for 10 minutes. Alyssa, I'll turn things to you for a debrief on this exercise before we start to wrap things up.
Yeah, I guess I'll just see if anybody has comments, thoughts, questions, having taken a few minutes to tinker with the crosswalking tool and think about syllabi, learning outcomes. Do folks feel like this is a tool that you can see yourself using for this purpose? Are we all pretty? Oh, go ahead, Joan.
So the learning outcomes are from the syllabus.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I worry that I've been too ambitious in my learning outcomes on my syllabi.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm claiming, I'm teaching and claiming a lot. And I think that in my department, we've been really encouraged to flesh out our learning outcomes using various taxonomies and whatever. And some of those things may not be accessible from another thing. So that's to my pause is about that, is that our learning outcomes are really, like in my department, they're really robust at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and again, this is a tool, right? So I think that for the purpose of putting together these samples, yes, we pulled direct, and that was sort of what I was getting at when I was saying, take a look at the syllabi, take a look at whether or not like this set of learning outcomes is really the thing that you would want to know that the student has mastered. I think that as faculty, as content experts, as curricular experts in your department, you may have a sense by looking at the content of a training or certification that like, yes, this is aligned, or I don't think this is really aligned. So to the extent that the tool, if you boil it down to your learning outcomes and you're saying like, actually, these don't exactly, like, I do believe that this is aligned, but this matching process is not, it's not working for this purpose. That's food for thought, I think, for departments. And I think it also doesn't have to come down to, so we can't award credit for this. I think that you are the decision makers. You can make that distinction in your process. So a tool, recommendations, not suggestions, as Bill and his friend at Peloton like to say, like they make suggestions, you make decisions. So it's a resource. It's not a mandate to use it this way. And it looks like there's a question Ted's answering it here.
Yep, yeah, I think you got it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Donna, I think we kind of talked about this. You were saying like if everything wasn't covered, I don't know, it could be covered in other courses. Again, we talked about the satisfactory of like at least 70% of the material should be absorbed through, through the crosswalk, and that's like satisfactory or sufficient knowledge. Is that kind of where you're going with Donna?
Well, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, that's a good point,
I,
Ted. I just was thinking about that. Yeah.
I
I mean,
actually got my degree. I have a degree in education from CSI from 1,000 years ago. So I'm fairly familiar with with the design of the course that we're looking at your syllabus. And you know, I would be hesitant to be able to give credit for that particular course to students who have not had the opportunity to learn about the theoretical underpinnings of a lot of what you're teaching. And so I would be uncomfortable with giving credit for that course. So that's why I asked in the chat, would it be possible? Because we're not talking about droves of students, right? You might be talking about one or two students who come in to the college asking for this. Could you potentially give them an independent study so that you could use that opportunity just sort of to fill the gaps? And then you can at least like put your head on the pillow and say, okay, not only did the student have the application stuff in the workplace, but now I've given them an independent study to be able to fill those gaps. I'm satisfied they have the theoretical because they're going to need that. They're going to need that for the building block for the other courses that are going to come later, right? I was just wondering, what do you do when there's a gap? Basically, I guess is my question.
You want to go, Alyssa, or?
You can certainly, because I
I
remember
was
you
going to
talking
chime in
about
on
this a
one
little
too, but
bit
go ahead,
about.
Alyssa.
No, I think I remember, Ted, like you talking a little bit about the fact that like you did know that there were certain sort of theoretical pieces that you knew were covered in other courses that they would have to take, and so it didn't give you too much concern in your department, too much concern because you understand the curricular structure of your department and the degree program. And again, that's where the expertise and the autonomy of departments becomes really important here.
Yeah,
But Ted, say more if you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think education borrow a lot of things from a lot of philosophers from social science. So there is overlap. So even when you think about viscosity, you think about um, uh, Pavlov, all these different great philosophers. Even when I talk about in class, students are nodding not because this is the first time they heard this information. They heard it in psychology class. They heard it in other social science courses. So, I think there's other opportunities to reflect and hear about other philosophers or other theoretical underpinnings at other courses. And then even when you think about throughout the time in our education program, these names and scenarios are going to come back up again. So it's not one class does not capture a whole educational experience. There's other opportunities for educational reinforcement, whether that's in-house or in other departments. So I don't think you're going to lose per se.
You're kind of missing.
If I could bring up 2 points that Donna, your comment and your question have made me think of. First of all, the willingness to be flexible. I have worked with multiple institutions all over the country over the years. And one of those ways of being flexible is offering, even a 1 credit hour independent study if it's the considered judgment of the faculty that there's just a little something lacking, but we can bolster that. That's certainly one approach. I like Ted's approach of looking at these learning outcomes, not necessarily in one course, but across the curriculum. I think that's an approach that is absolutely important. But something else that I'd just like to throw out there for everyone to consider, and that is always keeping in mind that when you are looking at this kind of activity, it is at the end of the day the learning outcomes that drive the entire process. And so that willingness to be flexible, that willingness to recognize that the learning outcomes can occur at multiple points in the curriculum reminded me of something that I heard from one of your CUNY colleagues back a little over a year and a half ago, when I first did a workshop for CUNY. And he offered this guidance for offering credit for prior learning. I've never forgotten it. Do not offer credit for prior learning unless you are very comfortable with the fact that once you offer the student that credit for that course, you have certified that they have earned the credit for that course, that they have the wherewithal to take the next higher course and the next course, right? And he was basing this on his experience as being the transfer credit person in his department. Think of it in those terms. Because if you do otherwise, you're doing them a disservice. So I have never forgotten that. I think that is one of the best pieces of guidance I've ever heard on CPL. We have a hand up. Go ahead, Holly.
I was just going to say one of the things we have done is, because we track our CPL students, is kind of have to remind people that when we grant CPL for something, this isn't a commandment set in stone that can never be changed. That we can grant CPL for a training or an exam or something, and then track the students. And if we find that, hey, we awarded college credit for this course equivalency instead of elective credit, and the 20 students who have used this over the last 2 years, 50% were having trouble in a later course, then we can go back and say, you know what, it wasn't the right equivalency. We don't take it away from those who awarded it, but we just go in and change it. Our rule is usually we give students about a 6-month leeway. So if someone's in the middle of earning credit, they don't do it. But, that's been helpful. It's also been helpful to remind my faculty of that, so they don't feel like they're making some decision that can't be undone. I will say that we've never had to retract or change any credit. The type of credit we've done is we've awarded elective credit, then later a course has been created and it's then the equivalent of a course. But tracking students in that way to see if something is having a negative impact on the students, because ultimately we want to have students graduating, is important. And I'll just add, if you code students, and I would say if anybody doing a CPL program, that's the first thing you should do, is figure out your coding. You can then go by after a while and say, oh, look at the retention impact it's having. Look at the graduation impact it's having. Because if you're showing students are being retained at a higher rate, if you're showing students are graduating at a higher rate, then that also you can then play off of that and say, obviously we're aligning things well, because students who are doing CPL are graduating, they're graduating sooner and more of them are graduating. So that course we thought that might be not 100% aligned or 80% aligned is doing what it's supposed to do. So that's, I think, also where the coding can come in really well. But you can undo something. You can say, let's do this, we think it's right, and then later realize, hey, this wasn't the alignment we thought, or wow, we teach this so differently, we really needed to have this. And you don't have to take away credit, you just make it elective credit, because everybody needs approximately 120 credits. So even elective credit can wind up being helpful for students.
Thank you so much, Holly. Those are such good points. And yeah, this is dynamic work. This is not, you don't just figure it out and cross it off. You keep iterating and you keep finding your way, and hopefully engaging more of your colleagues and making sure that you really understand the impact that it's having, both good and bad, and address both ways. So yeah,
Alyssa, Ted, any last words from CUNY?
I would just say thank you all so much for making time for this on a Friday during a busy time of year, and really hope that this was useful, and that it is sort of setting in motion some thinking and possibilities for you. And would be so happy to hear from any of you with any questions. We will be circulating all of the materials early next week, and just really excited to continue the conversation and hope that that we will, and if you're coming out of this with ideas for other kinds of sessions you want us to do, other kinds of trainings that would be useful, keep in touch. The more we understand about what would be helpful to you, the more we can, make sure we're meeting your needs out there. So thank you all so much. And thank
Folks,
you,
thank you
Bill.
all.
Great
Folks,
job.
no,
Thank you
great.
for guiding
You as
us.
well. Alyssa, Ted, it's always a pleasure. Folks, thank you for your patience. Thank you for your candor and really good ideas. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll
Yes.
make sure you get all these materials in your hands early next week.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend.
Happy Friday.